Lord of the Mysteries, Incarnation of Chaos by author Yu Shang Wu Wang Chuan. Chapter 201-230. The Hanged Man Decides to Work Harder. Good afternoon, Mr. Fool. Accompanied by Justice Audrey's usual cheerful voice, several figures appeared on the originally empty gray fog, and a new round of the Tarot Club began. Justice Audrey greeted all the members of the Tarot Club as usual, and her gaze couldn't help but fall on little son Derek. Not only her, but other Tarot Club members also subconsciously looked in little son Derek's direction, observing his state. During the last Tarot Club meeting, everyone learned that City of Silver was about to welcome light, and little son would most likely be part of the vanguard team leaving the forsaken land of the gods to come to the northern and southern continents. So now, it can be said that apart from a few individuals involved, other Tarot Club members are very curious about the current situation of City of Silver and whether little son has truly left the forsaken land of the gods. Coincidentally, no member provided a new Russell's diary this time, so the Fool Klein simply announced the start of the free communication session. Mr. Sun, how is City of Silver doing now? Justice Audrey eagerly looked at little son Derek and asked. With her taking the lead, the other Tarot Club members naturally didn't need to ask again, and for a moment, they all waited for little son Derek's answer. Before I left, City of Silver already had its own sun. As soon as he talked about this, little son Derek's face flushed with excitement. He then gestured while describing the previous events to the other members of the Tarot Club, finally saying. Later, His Highness Lucifer led the Chiefess, the Vanguard team members, out of the forsaken land of the gods and brought us to a city called Byam. I had never seen such a city, and there was so much delicious food. Little son Derek almost subconsciously shared what he had seen and heard in Byam with the Tarot Club members. After speaking, he remembered something else, raised his hand to touch the back of his head, and said somewhat sheepishly. Sorry, Miss Justice, you clearly asked about City of Silver, and I just kept talking about what happened after we came out. It's all right, I'm very happy to learn about your current lives. Justice Audrey shook her head and couldn't help but say with a smile, I was a bit worried before, but now it seems I was overthinking. Do you have any plans for your next step? Is there anything I can help with? The chief said that our primary goal now is to adapt to life in the outside world, and then prepare for the subsequent arrival of City of Silver's people. He plans to take us to investigate some Beander circles in the outside world first, and then see if we can sell some Beander materials for money. Little son Derek had no intention of hiding anything and spilled everything he knew like pouring beans. Perhaps in this regard, I can offer some help. Hanged Man Alger, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. I have some connections in Byam, and I'm relatively familiar with the 5 Cs. If you have any Beander materials that need to be sold, I can help. Thank you, Mr. Hanged Man. Little son Derek thanked him earnestly, then said, however, I can't decide this matter. I'm afraid I'll have to tell the chief first. Hanged Man Alger was not surprised by this. He merely said, I happen to have something to do in Byam recently. If you don't mind, perhaps we can talk in person. If it had been before, Hanged Man Alger would not have so rashly made a request for a meeting. He had always been cautious. But now, a corner of the iceberg of Mr. Fool's power in the real world had been completely revealed to Hanged Man Alger. It was a power far beyond what Hanged Man Alger had previously imagined, causing him to tremble while also realizing that this was an opportunity, and he had to do something. So, after learning that the people of City of Silver were now in Byam, Hanged Man Alger made a decision in his heart. The 5 Cs happened to be where he usually operated, and here he had various inherent advantages, allowing him to naturally come into contact with the people of City of Silver. Afterward, whether it was utilizing the uniqueness of City of Silver to help them while securing reasonable benefits for himself, or deepening his ties with City of Silver and establishing a deeper connection with Mr. Fool's power, both were good choices for Hanged Man Alger. As for the risk, because City of Silver now also believes in Fool, and Hanged Man Alger brought up this matter in the Tarot Club, under the witness of Mr. Fool, the risk of this matter is actually very low. Mr. Hanged Man, you're coming to see me. That's great. Hearing Hanged Man's words, little son Derek immediately became happy. He truly had a high regard for Hanged Man, thinking he was a good person who had always helped him. So, he quickly nodded and said, I will tell the chief about this. The chief will definitely be very happy for Mr. Hanged Man to come as a guest. It's a pity I can't go to buy him. Justice Audrey showed a slightly regretful expression. As a noble young lady who hadn't officially come of age, although she had some freedom to travel, it was limited to within Backland. Outside Backland, she had to report to her family. Let alone going to buy him, even going to other cities in Loan would require her parents' consent. However, Justice Audrey thought of something, looked at little son Derek, and said, "If you are relatively short on money right now, I can lend it to you. I can probably get £5,000, or directly convert it into corresponding supplies. Do you need anything? Although this will make me relatively tight for a while, it will be fine after the coming of age ceremony, which is only 2 months away," Justice Audrey added in her heart. She truly wanted to help those poor people in City of Silver. You could say her kindness had limitations, but the kindness itself was not fake. "Thank you, Miss Justice, but we probably don't need it yet. If we really run out of money, we will borrow from you." Little son Derek thanked her earnestly. "Is Amon treating you well?" Roland asked at this time. He hadn't paid much attention to City of Silver these past few days and wasn't really sure if Amon was doing a good job, only that the people there were safe. Little son Derek was stunned when he heard Roland's words, then he realized that as His Highness Lucifer's student, Mr. Emperor probably did know of Amon's existence, and he quickly said, "Mr. Amon is very good to us. He arranged new living quarters for us, supported us in rebuilding more suitable houses, taught us the language and writing of the outside world." Little son Derek spoke like pouring beans. From his description, Roland could confirm that Amon had indeed done a very good job. He had handled food, clothing, housing, and transportation very well, and he hadn't forgotten to teach the people of City of Silver the necessary knowledge of the outside world's writing and history. Chapter 201 Pigeon spirits also need to eat. Very good. It seems I don't need to complain to my teacher. He has indeed taken good care of you, Roland said, listening quietly, then showing a satisfied smile. The fool Klein, who was also very concerned about this matter, breathed a sigh of relief, feeling much more at ease. He had been truly worried about whether Amon would do anything to Little Son and the others. Now it seemed Amon, at least for the short term, did not intend to violate his agreement with Mr. Lucifer. "Amon," Hanged Man Alger asked after a slight hesitation, "is he a member of the Amon family from the 4th epoch?" Although the existence of Time Angel was a secret, many Beyonders in the Tudor Empire's Amon family knew about it. However, few knew that the Amon family only consisted of Amon. Little son Derek immediately looked bewildered. Clearly, although he was catching up on the outside world's history, this question was still beyond his current understanding. Roland, however, nodded straightforwardly and said, "Indeed, it is that Amon. He has an agreement with my teacher, so he will help my teacher take care of the people of City of Silver." So that's also an angel. Hanged Man Alger was startled, noticing Roland's choice of words. This made his mind race. So, is this Amon also an angel-serving fool? No, not necessarily. Perhaps he just has a good personal relationship with His Highness Lucifer. What is the Amon family? Justice Audrey asked with curiosity. She was always filled with good cheer when it came to mysterious matters. A family formed by Amon and his clones, so the Amon family only has Amon. Roland blinked, giving a simple explanation. As for who Amon is, perhaps you still remember the creator that City of Silver believed in. Justice Audrey paused, then subconsciously asked, is Amon related to that creator? Little son Derek also couldn't help but look at Roland. Even though he had now converted his faith to Fool in Mr. Lucifer, he would still subconsciously pay attention to topics concerning the creator, as this was the faith of their City of Silver for thousands of years. Hanged Man Alger, for a moment, suspected he had misheard. After all, he had learned about this part of history, and the records only said that the Amon family was a great noble family of the Tudor Empire. How could such a family be composed of just one person? But Hanged Man Alger quickly reacted, realizing that, Emperor, had no reason to lie about this. It could only be said that angel-level existences were indeed too mysterious and bizarre, something he, a mid-sequence Beyonder, could not imagine at all. What Amon? What creator? What are they talking about? It sounds so profound. Magician Furs felt like she wasn't on the same wavelength as the others. This wasn't the first time she had felt this way. The last time they talked about the forsaken land of the gods and city of silver, she also felt out of place. Is this really a topic for a rookie like her to participate in? Magician Furs fell into her usual contemplation. As for World was just a family member, empty-headed, and incapable of thought. Amon is the child of that creator, Roland introduced simply. As soon as he spoke, the entire tarot club fell silent for a few seconds. Justice Audrey almost couldn't maintain her spectator state, instinctively raising her hand to cover her mouth. Goddess, Amon is actually the child of that creator. She couldn't help but glance at Little Sun opposite her again. Before changing their faith, City of Silver, including Little Sun, had believed in that creator. How would they view this child of the creator? Mr. Amon never told us this, Little Sun Derek was clearly very shocked, almost subconsciously saying. He probably thought there was no need to tell you, as City of Silver's faith in the creator has ended, Roland said, looking at Little Sun Derek, you don't need to worry about this. Amon wouldn't make things difficult for you because of it. After all, although Amon was quite malicious, he would respect his father's choice. Little Sun Derek pursed his lips, perhaps a little conflicted, and finally said, I am very grateful for his help to us, but no matter what, we will not change our faith in Fool. He then solemnly looked at Fool and said, Praise be to you, Fool. The others then followed suit, bowing together and saying, Praise be to you, Fool. The Fool Klein. No, why did they suddenly bow so properly? Although slightly awkward due to Roland's presence, Fool still managed to show no flaws thanks to his strong facial control. He merely nodded slightly, signaling everyone to sit down. This topic ended there. Roland then looked at Magician Furs and said with a smile, Magician, I would like to commission a book from you. Ah. Magician Furs, who was originally just spectating, clearly didn't expect to be involved today. She paused for a moment before asking, what kind of book do you want to commission? These are the requirements. Roland materialized a piece of paper covered in writing and handed it to Magician Furs. Not a single mistake, not a single omission, every single detail was there. Magician Furs took the paper and quickly scanned it, seeing the following content, The Great Detective and the Doll Girl. The protagonist is a man with multiple identities. On the surface, he is a new detective in Backland, but secretly, he is an investigator with a hidden official identity, investigating a certain incident. One unexpected encounter leads the great detective to meet a pursued doll girl. After reading the content on the paper, Magician Furs's eyes lit up. Her professional instinct as a writer immediately made her imagine a love story spanning hundreds of thousands of words. She looked up at Roland and said, An interesting premise, but why ask me to write it? To be honest, I just finished a new book recently, and I don't really feel like writing. Although brainstorming was enjoyable, as a slacker, actually putting pen to paper was out of the question. Because I believe in your professional ability, Magician, Roland said with a smile, looking at Magician, finally revealing his true purpose, to simply and actively invite her to join the club. He smiled and said, As for the remuneration, a deposit of £1,000, and then a portion of the payment will be given each time a draft is submitted, calculated at £10 per 1,000 words. If you don't need pounds, I can also provide potion formulas or corresponding materials, such as equivalent potion formulas for apprentice or arbiter subsequent sequences. With Mr. Dorr present, obtaining apprentice pathway potion formulas was not difficult for Roland. Arbiter pathway potion formulas could also be obtained later through the Ruin royal family. Magician Furs. At this moment, Magician Furs deeply understood what it meant to say, I originally wanted to refuse, but he offered too much. You are too kind. I will go back and start brainstorming how to write the beginning. Magician Furs felt she had never been so motivated. She hadn't expected that after advancing to Trickmaster, her savings had truly hit rock bottom. Now was precisely when she needed money, so how could she resist such temptation? Even a slacker needs to eat. Chapter 202, Shao Kei's Friendship Breaking Fist. Happy New Year. Magician Furs was delighted, but the Fool Klein, as the person involved, wished he could dig out a 3-bedroom, 1-living-room apartment on the spot. As the controller of the Grey Fog, the Fool Klein naturally knew what was on the paper Roland handed to Magician Furs, And it was precisely because of this that he almost immediately recognized that the great detective, the protagonist on it, was based on himself. As for the puppet girl, could it be Miss Sharon? The fool Klein speculated in his heart, only feeling mortified and awkward. He didn't understand what Jack was up to again, and he couldn't ask in front of the Tarot Club members, so he could only endure until this Tarot Club ended. After leaving above the gray fog, Klein almost immediately exited his room and knocked on Roland's room door. After Roland opened the door, he asked helplessly and confusedly, "What's the deal with that book you commissioned Magician to write?" Roland blinked, his expression unchanged, and said, "I just got tired of the existing romance novels, so I found someone to produce some new material for myself." "Stop playing dumb. You know what I'm asking." Klein looked at Roland irritably and said, "That great detective is me, right? There's a saying, art comes from life, so it's very normal to use people around you as story prototypes." "It's definitely not because I wanted to see you make a fool of yourself," Roland said self-righteously. "Klein, bastard, you already said it. I knew there was something wrong with you being so eager to get Magician to join the club." Klein sighed, feeling that he had still let his guard down. He then thought of something else, looked at Roland, and said helplessly, "Jack, it's fine if you want to see me make a fool of myself, but this matter also involves Miss Sharon. Isn't it a bit inappropriate to portray her like that?" But Sharon already agreed. Roland spread his hands, as if he had expected this, and pulled out an authorization letter from his pocket. The content on it was Sharon's authorization for Jack Jones to use her image to invite others for literary creation. Klein was stunned for a moment. He took the authorization letter and read it carefully several times before saying in disbelief, "Why would Sharon agree to authorize you?" "Of course, I exchanged stories with her for it." Roland said, "As a matter of course, I used 10 stories to exchange for Sharon's authorization, so in this matter, you are actually the only victim." At this point, Roland paused, looked at Klein seriously, and said, "But our relationship is so good, you'll definitely forgive me, right?" Klein didn't know what to say at this moment. He looked at Roland and sighed helplessly, saying, "If I don't forgive you, can I beat you to death instead?" "That's great." Roland seemed relieved as he patted his chest, then grinned and said, "Then Klein, you wouldn't mind if I commissioned others to write a gender-bent version of you falling in love with a witch, would you?" A huge question mark appeared above Klein's head. It was hard to say whether Klein was laughing out of anger at this moment. He looked down at his fist and suddenly felt that he couldn't let his fist be just a decoration. So a few minutes later, Amon, who was originally sulking on the living room sofa, suddenly heard a loud noise from the second floor, accompanied by a familiar voice. "Don't run. Today I'm going to let you know what a friendship face-breaking punch is. Klein, we're the best of friends, ow. Hey, sorry, the Klein you knew is dead. You chose this. What's in front of you now is Nyohuru Klein. Wait, what's that noise? Who's playing a record?" A commotion of chaos accompanied by inexplicable music made Amon instinctively turn his head towards the second floor, only to see Jack Jones sliding down the stair railing, with Klein behind him, clenching his fists and gnashing his teeth. What happened? Amon was a bit confused, but looking at this scene, he felt a strange excitement for some reason, as if a restless instinct was surging within him, making him almost subconsciously murmur, "Fight! Fight!" This made Medici, who was adjusting the record player nearby, glance at him, shake his head, and mock, "It's true that a leopard cannot change its spots." Even though he had lost his memory and his mind had regressed to that of a child, his instincts for watching excitement and having fun were still there. Just then, Roland slipped behind him in a flash, using him as a shield, while poking his head out and saying to the stopped Klein, "If you're not satisfied with a witch, I can also change it to a hunter." Klein was truly exasperated. For a moment, he didn't know if Jack was doing it on purpose or truly unaware of what he was angry about. He said with a forced smile, "Why don't you write your own gender-bent fanfiction?" "I can write it." Unexpectedly, Roland nodded without any sense of shame. Although gender bending was definitely out of the question, it was well known that Nyarlathotep's incarnations included Nyarlathotep, so by extension, if he wrote about Nyarlathotep, it would be his own gender-bent fanfiction, no problem. Klein was stunned for a moment, clearly not expecting such an answer. He hesitated, and Roland perked up, saying righteously, Klein, you can't be like this. If you can't even accept gender-bent fanfiction, how will you digest the faceless potion in the future? Do I have to dress as a woman to digest the faceless potion? Klein looked at him expressionlessly. Roland blinked, looked at him, and said, that's hard to say. Every single one of them is correct. Klein, what? For a moment, Klein wasn't sure if Jack was telling the truth or just spouting nonsense. Are you two very idle? Medici really couldn't stand watching these two fooling around anymore. He said irritably, if you're so idle, why don't you clean up? Do I need to remind you how many things you just knocked over? Suddenly, a powerful, male mother, aura appeared around Medici, an aura that belonged only to a mother, who was busy all day, inside and out, taking care of her family's food, drink, and daily life. Klein immediately picked up the broom nearby with a guilty conscience and said, I'll clean up right away. Roland also chuckled as he walked out from behind Medici, rare in his guilt, and said, I'll help. So the two who had just caused chaos in the house immediately went to clean up the mess. Tisk. Medici pouted, then saw Amon looking at him with bright eyes. He raised an eyebrow and said, what are you looking at? Little red mama, you're so amazing. Amon's expression held a hint of admiration. It must be said that the admiration from Amon was somewhat satisfying to Medici, but the other party's address made him frown and say, no, who taught you that address? Brother Jack taught me. He said you are the man who can be the mother of this family, Amon replied without any intention of hiding. Hey. Facing this unsurprising answer, Medici let out an ambiguous laugh. He suddenly looked at Amon, curled his lips, and said, Amon, do you want to be like me? Chapter 203, Rolling and Will, Happy New Year. I want to. Little Amon immediately nodded. Then come with me. Medici waved to Little Amon. Little Amon excitedly jumped off the sofa and followed Medici into the kitchen. So, by late afternoon that day, when Roland and Klein had tidied up the house and sat down at the dinner table, they found that tonight's dinner seemed slightly different from usual. Are the colors of a few dishes a bit darker today? Roland pinched his chin, scrutinizing the dishes on the table, and voiced his confusion. I tried some new methods today, Medici replied, sitting on a chair with his arms crossed. I always feel like there's a conspiracy, Roland blinked, not picking up his chopsticks immediately. Klein, next to him, didn't think too much about it. He picked up a mouthful of food with his chopsticks and put it into his mouth. His movements paused briefly, then he chewed as if nothing had happened. A few seconds later, Klein turned his head to Roland and said, I don't feel like there's any problem. Do I look that easy to fool? Roland gave him a slightly speechless look. Already certain that today's meal was problematic, he picked up his coffee and took a sip. The next second, PFF'd. No, who put salt in my coffee, and a lethal dose? Roland put down the coffee, pulled out a tissue, and wiped his mouth, feeling only bitterness and astringency. I made it. Little Amon proudly raised his hand at this moment. Little Red's mommy said coffee tastes better with salt. Jack, don't you like it? Roland looked at Little Amon, then at Medici, and finally asked sincerely, so what's wrong with the dishes? I put a lot of sugar in it, Little Amon said proudly. Sugar is delicious, I like it. Klein likes sweet things, he likes it. Klein. The two victims exchanged glances, and Klein suddenly said, I remember Amon turned himself into a child to develop humanity, right? Roland nodded. Klein then posed a profound question, if this continues, will he really not go astray? Roland showed a thoughtful expression, then shrugged a few seconds later and said, it's fine. He was already crooked anyway. If he really can't be straightened, we can't be blamed. Klein. That makes a lot of sense. What's wrong? Mr. Isaac, who was a bit late for dinner due to some matters to handle, came down from the second floor and, seeing the silent dining table, couldn't help but ask curiously. Klein and Roland exchanged glances. The former was about to warn him when Roland quickly covered his mouth. The latter said, nothing, we were just discussing little Amon's education. Hearing this, Mr. Isaac's expression was not unexpected. His gaze fell on Little Amon, and thinking of Medici's deception towards him, he couldn't help but shake his head and say, I thought this was inappropriate before. If you want to raise a normal child, proper guidance is essential. Huh. Mr. Azek's voice stopped abruptly because he had already tasted the pea soup closest to him. The instant sweetness that reached his lungs made Mr. Azek's eyebrows furrow. I'm sorry, Mr. Azek, I didn't warn you. Tonight's food and tea were all processed by little Amon. Klein, finally free, quickly said, feeling a bit embarrassed and a bit guilty. Actually, he could have forced himself free just now, but for a moment, Klein was curious about Mr. Azek's reaction to eating these dishes, so he hesitated for a second and didn't have time. It's fine, Mr. Azek shook his head helplessly, his gaze falling on little Amon again. Even if the latter was still immature, he should have noticed something was wrong by now. His expression was slightly uneasy, but besides the uneasiness, there was also an excitement like a successful prank. This made Mr. Azek sigh, raise his hand and rub little Amon's head, saying gently, "It's okay, little Amon, this isn't your fault. Just promise uncle you won't do it again next time, okay?" Okay, little Amon nodded slightly awkwardly. Good boy, Mr. Azek smiled gently, then looked at the others and said, perhaps we can slightly modify our educational approach for little Amon in the future. I don't think anyone would want us to raise a being worse than a time angel, right? Mr. Azek is still reliable. While Little Red is very suitable as a nanny, he's really not good at teaching children. While a new round of discussions on little Amon's education policy was taking place at Jack's villa, Roland, wearing the Lucifer persona, knocked on Dr. Allen's door while sighing inwardly. Can I help you, sir? Dr. Allen looked at the stranger at his door in confusion. Hello, I'm looking for Will, Roland said with a smile. Dr. Allen's expression immediately became confused, saying, What Will? There's no Will here. Who are you? In Dr. Allen's current understanding, he hadn't connected his recent misfortunes with Will, so he didn't recall a certain patient for a moment. Then I must have the wrong address. Sorry to bother you, sir, Roland was not surprised by this. He didn't really expect to directly find Will's whereabouts. The main reason Roland appeared here and asked so directly was to send a message to Will, who is currently nowhere to be found. I'm looking for you. If you're willing, you can come out and meet. Roland wasn't afraid that Will wouldn't receive this message. After all, Dr. Allen had already established some connection with Will, and it would be strange if the Snake of Fate didn't sense something related to himself. It's fine, hearing Roland say that, Dr. Allen didn't mind. He shook his head and then asked enthusiastically, Are you in a hurry to find this person? Do you need my help? I'm quite familiar with this area. Thank you, sir, but no need. Roland smiled and politely declined, then chose to leave. He then found a nearby coffee shop and asked for a private booth. He was momentarily stunned when he saw a report about the upcoming Rosal Memorial Exhibition on a newspaper provided for guests in the booth. I almost forgot about Rosal's matter. Roland's expression was subtle for a few seconds, uncharacteristically embarrassed, then it turned into full interest. Then I'll just arrange for him to meet Bernadette during this Rosal Memorial Exhibition. Let me think, how about giving Bernadette a rising from the coffin surprise? Roland was thinking about how to make the reunion of Rosal and his daughter more memorable when he suddenly sensed something and tilted his head. Across from him, a boy of 7 or 8 years old was sitting there, unceremoniously eating the ice cream Roland had specially ordered. As he ate, he commented, I actually don't really like the ice cream from this place. It's a bit too sweet. Wishing everyone a happy new year, and I'll be taking a day off tomorrow. Chapter 204 Who is the old swan's biological cub? I also think this ice cream is a bit too sweet. It would be perfect if the sweetness was halved, Roland said, not surprised by Will's sudden appearance, and naturally expressed his opinion, following Will's words. He never liked overly sweet things, unlike Klein who loved sweets. Will frowned upon hearing this, probably after thinking for a second, and retorted, a third is enough. If it's half, it won't be sweet enough, and ice cream that isn't sweet enough has no soul. But in my opinion, for something like dessert, the best compliment should be, not sweet, Roland said, taking a sip of coffee and smiling, by the way, their coffee is good. Heretic, Will muttered with a slight hint of displeasure, clearly unable to agree with Roland's taste. Then, he picked up the coffee in front of him, took a sip, and nodded, the coffee is indeed very good. It seems we have both disagreements and areas of consensus in our tastes, Roland said, smiling at Will, this indicates that our compatibility is quite good. Where is our compatibility good? I think our tastes are very different. Will puffed out his cheeks in dissatisfaction, like a large hamster, then scooped a large spoon of ice cream into his mouth. Clearly, they were discussing not only taste but also using it as a topic to talk about other things. It seems we have some more disagreements. Well, if you like it, eat more. Roland smiled and pushed his untouched ice cream towards Will, then watched Will eat as if observing an interesting small animal. Will looked up at Roland, not refusing his kind offer. After finishing both portions of ice cream, Will wiped his mouth with a napkin and let out a slightly contented burp. It was clear that he genuinely loved eating ice cream. Roland then spoke, I thought you would avoid me. Will's movements paused. He seemed to have thought of something and ground his teeth, then looked at Roland with a hint of helplessness, saying, I wanted to avoid you too, but fate told me that if I avoided you, it would only lead to a worse outcome for me. Roland raised an eyebrow at this, considering the possible scenarios if Will avoided him. It was nothing more than two possibilities. The first was that he would be provoked into a rebellious mindset, determined to catch Will, and in that situation, Will would inevitably be subjected to various persecutions if caught by him. The second was that he would give up on catching Will and instead fully support Fate Angel Ouroboros. In this scenario, Will would likely truly end up dead in a short time, and Ouroboros would loot his corpse with tears in his eyes. You certainly made the right decision. Roland nodded, agreeing with Will's words, and smiled, so, can I assume we have already reached a cooperation agreement? Will rolled his eyes exasperatedly and said, what about the bargaining chip display? Shouldn't we first discuss our respective needs and what we can bring to each other in the future? Of course, we can discuss those, but that doesn't prevent us from first reaching a consensus on cooperation. Besides, if you didn't come here to cooperate with me, why would you eat my ice cream? Roland said with a smile, then pointedly glanced at the empty ice cream cup in front of Will. Will choked, then somewhat indignantly took a large gulp of coffee before muttering, this is truly the most expensive ice cream I've ever eaten. Perhaps it's the most cost-effective. Roland retorted with a smile, then took a sip of coffee and said, then, let's move on to the bargaining chip display that you're most looking forward to, and discuss our respective demands and chips. Roland put down his coffee cup, looked at Will, and said with a direct smile, I can help you accommodate the fate uniqueness. Will's expression showed no surprise at this. He simply said, perhaps I can find the right opportunity on my own. PFF'd. Roland couldn't help but burst out laughing, looking at Will and saying, are you serious? Will, do you have some misunderstanding about your own luck? Will's expression immediately darkened, but he didn't retort. Instead, he lowered his head to study the patterns on the table, feeling a bit depressed. There are generally two ways to accommodate the fate uniqueness. The first is to find the right opportunity in the torrent of fate, which sounds simple, but in reality, it is a completely deceptive condition. Because the so-called right in the condition is a completely vague concept. Perhaps you think you have encountered the right opportunity, but in reality, you haven't, and you cannot search for it using extraordinary abilities. So, whether you can succeed depends entirely on luck, which can be said to be very characteristic of the fate pathway. The second method is to have a pillar or half-pillar level existence forcibly suppress the fate uniqueness for you, allowing you to accommodate it. Although Will obtained the fate uniqueness early on and has been trying to accommodate it for years, he had no clue about the so-called right opportunity. As for seeking help from a pillar-level existence, that was even more impossible. The only pillars in this world before, apart from the outer gods, were the ancient sun god. But the ancient sun god already had Fate Angel Ouroboros by his side, so how could Will possibly go and offer himself up? So, even though he obtained the fate uniqueness early, Will had never been able to accommodate it. This meant that the fate uniqueness not only brought no help to Will but also became a burden, making Will feel mentally exhausted daily, and even making Will once doubt his own luck. Every single one is wrong. Is he really an angel of the fate pathway? How could his luck be so bad? It's normal. True luck isn't about huge ups and downs in fortune. How can someone who is lucky one moment and unlucky the next be called the old goose's favorite child? Roland naturally saw what Will was thinking and precisely added, for example, a certain god of steam and machinery, that is the true child of fortune. If he had walked the fate pathway, I have no doubt that after he became an angel, You and Ouroboros would both fall, making way for him, and then the western continent's seal would show flaws in minutes, and thus the key of light would descend from the sky, and a new old one would be born. Although a bit exaggerated, this was Roland's true thought. After all, in terms of luck, the god of steam and machinery's luck was indeed too good. He hadn't even finished digesting the Sequence 1 characteristic when he obtained the Sequence 0 potion, successfully advancing to Sequence 0. When he encountered difficulties digesting the Sequence 0 potion, he met Rosal, who descended from the heavens, and he digested the potion while lying down. He chose the right side in the battle of the Lord of Mysteries, saving himself many years of detours. When the apocalypse came, so many people died, yet the god of steam and machinery remained alive and kicking, even going for further studies. He truly was the old goose's biological child. Chapter 205 Heartbreaking. Chapter 205, A Stab to the Heart. It's not as exaggerated as you make it sound, although steam certainly had a bit of good luck. Will naturally didn't know the future fate of the god of steam and machinery, but he was certainly aware of his past fate. Comparing that to himself, who had held a uniqueness for many years but failed to accommodate it, Will's expression twisted for a moment. Because he realized that what Roland said might actually have a chance of coming true. Damn it, Will uncharacteristically cursed in his heart. He then looked at Roland with some frustration and said, "Are you here to cooperate with me or to annoy me? I just simply wanted to stab you in the heart. After all, with such good conditions, it would be a pity not to." Roland's answer was both honest and self-righteous. He spread his hands and said, "And these two things don't conflict. Will, can I just turn around and leave?" Will looked at Roland and asked with equal sincerity. "Then you'll probably be caught by me and brought back." Roland thought seriously for half a second before answering. The two exchanged glances, then Will sighed and said, "Do you talk to the sun god and the others like this too? It seems the power of fate has shown you quite a lot." Roland smiled, then spread his hands and said, "What else?" "Then why didn't they beat you to death?" Will asked very seriously. "They probably did think about beating me to death, but the cost of killing me is too great." Roland answered frankly. He gestured casually and said, "To let the whole world be buried for one person, that's a cost they can't afford." After a pause, Roland added, "Of course, the most important thing is that the benefits I can bring them far outweigh the negative emotions I bring them." Will choked, then after a few seconds of silence, said, "Are you this honest with everyone?" "Honesty is one of my many inconspicuous virtues," Roland said with a smile, giving the standard answer. At that moment, various scenes from the authority of fate that Will had provided came to his mind, including but not limited to Roland deceiving people and spouting nonsense. So he nodded and sincerely said, I believe it." The two then exchanged glances again before Roland tilted his head and said, "So, are you satisfied with the conditions I offered?" The conditions here naturally referred to Roland's initial offer to help Will accommodate the uniqueness. "Are you sure the sun god would be willing to help me?" Will raised his doubts. He looked at Roland and said, "Perhaps he'd be more willing to help Ouroboros hunt me. But I never said I'd let the sun god help you accommodate the fate uniqueness." Roland blinked. Of course, he wouldn't let the sun god help Will accommodate the fate uniqueness. How awkward would that be if Ouroboros found out? Moreover, Roland's support for Will was originally intended to pit him against the Creator faction, reducing his own reliance on the Creator faction, so how could he let the sun god help Will? Not the sun god. Will was stunned, probably not expecting such a result. He looked at Roland hesitantly, then uncertainly said, "The Lord of the Mysteries." "That's right. But as you know, the Lord of the Mysteries hasn't been born yet, so you'll probably have to wait a few years." Roland didn't play coy, nodding frankly. As for how to get the Lord of the Mysteries to help Will, it's a joke. Whether the future Lord of the Mysteries is Mr. Dorr or Klein, with Roland's relationship with them, asking for a favor wouldn't be difficult. "I did once feel the opportune moment for the Lord of the Mysteries to be born." Will hesitated here, looking at Roland and saying, "So isn't this just an empty promise?" "It is indeed an empty promise, though I prefer to call it an investment." Roland took a sip of coffee, smiling. "Investing in me, a potential stock with limitless prospects and astonishing connections, isn't a bad choice, is it?" Will showed a thoughtful expression, then a second later nodded and said, "Although there's a suspicion of self-praise, you're right, it really isn't a bad choice." Will then looked up at Roland, with a puzzled expression, and asked seriously, "Then what do you hope to gain from me?" Hearing this question, Roland curved his lips into a smile. He took a sip of coffee, then unhurriedly said, "First, I suppose I have a bit of a collecting habit. I like to collect angels from various pathways that interest me. But Ouroboros is, after all, a subordinate of the sun god, and I can't poach him, so I can only set my sights on you." Will's mouth twitched. Thinking about the various angels surrounding Roland, he had to admit that what the other party said was true. Roland probably really liked collecting angels from various pathways. Second, Roland put down his coffee at this point, looking at Will with a smile. "Although my cooperation with the Sun God faction is very pleasant right now, we both have our reservations, making truly intimate cooperation impossible. I also don't want to rely too much on the Sun God's side, so of course, I need to find other collaborators. You, being an enemy of Ouroboros, are a good choice." Every word, every sentence, every meaning, was laid bare. "Aren't you afraid of the true creator hearing what you just said?" Will hadn't expected Roland to be so blunt, and he spoke with some difficulty. "I never intended to hide it from them, or rather, they knew my stance on this from the very beginning." Roland was being completely honest here. Among other things, as early as when he was chatting with Pales, Roland had already revealed his attitude in this regard, and he didn't believe Adam wasn't paying attention then. After a pause, the smile on Roland's lips grew even brighter, and he said, "Moreover, I know very well that they are also wary of me. Do you think they haven't established 100 plans against me? Or are they trying to win over allies to guard against me suddenly wanting to destroy the world?" Will was speechless for a moment, because based on his understanding of the Creator faction, this was definitely the case. Ultimately, Will could only sigh and grumble, "You adults are really too complicated, unlike me who just simply wants to accommodate the fate uniqueness. There's no helping it, the adult world is just that cruel." Also, Roland's expression became serious at this point, looking at Will and saying, "You're already an old vegetable for thousands of years, is it really okay to pretend to be a young sprout?" "Who said I'm thousands of years old? I'm clearly only 8 years old," Will said without any embarrassment, then puffed out his chest, as if to say, "I'm 8 years old and I'm proud. In this regard, Ouroboros can't compare to you, he doesn't have your naturally brazen shamelessness." Roland said with emotion, "You can't compare to me, you're the truly shameless one." Will looked at Roland seriously and said, "I'm just adhering to the principle that since I'm restarting, I should earnestly experience different stages of life. A child should act like a child." Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And please support the author by link in description. Chapter 206 Will Who Never Grows Up. "I see." Facing Will's words, Roland showed no embarrassment or anger. He just pinched his chin and thought for a few seconds, then suddenly said thoughtfully, "Actually, there's one question I've been curious about for a long time, but I don't know if it's convenient for you to answer." "You're suddenly so polite, I'm a little unaccustomed to it. What exactly do you want to ask?" Will looked at Roland suspiciously. "What I want to ask is, since you experience different stages of life every time you restart, have you ever been married and had children? Have you had the experience of growing old and frail, being bedridden, and having unfilial children?" Roland blinked and asked. He was genuinely curious. Ask, who also restarted his life, had clearly been in love, married, and had children in his countless lives. So, what about Will? In any case, Ouroboros, who is also a snake of fate, definitely had not. Each of his restarts was spent by the true creator's side, without such life experiences. Will was stunned for a moment, probably not expecting Roland to ask such a question. He then picked up his coffee, took a sip, and said, "You've asked a very good question. So, is it a yes or a no?" Roland smiled, looking at him. In most cases, I don't live to adulthood after restarting. I restart again in my teenage years or even as a child. The few lives where I did reach adulthood, I never actually got married and had children." Will shook his head, not hiding anything. This was not some unspeakable secret. After all, I am a snake of fate, and I'm being hunted by Ouroboros. Marrying ordinary people would harm them. For example, in this life, if it weren't for you, I would have already restarted. Indeed, your situation isn't suitable for marriage. Roland nodded, then suddenly said, no wonder you're so skilled at pretending to be a child. It turns out that, in a sense, you really are a child who never grows up. That's why I'm not some thousands-year-old fossil. In terms of psychological age, I'm still young. Will emphasized again. PFF'd. Roland couldn't help but laugh when he heard this, then raised his hand and rubbed Will's head, saying with a smile, all right, little Will, you're indeed only 8 years old. So, Roland paused here, looking at Will with a serious expression, and asked with a smile, little Will, do you want to grow up early or never grow up? The unstated meaning was to ask Will if he liked the kind of life where he often restarted before growing up, or if he was forced to restart repeatedly and become a child who never grew up because he was being hunted by Ouroboros. Don't squeeze my head, it'll stunt my growth. Will grumbled like a real child, then looked at Roland and said, being a child is certainly fun, but who wants to never grow up forever? The unstated meaning was that he didn't mind life as a child, but he also hoped to be able to grow up when he wanted to, rather than being forced to restart. You're so greedy, little Will, but it's okay, you're a child, so of course you can have it all. Roland smiled, looking at Will and extending his hand, revealing the Leziran Club badge that had appeared in his palm at some point. He looked at Will and said with a smile, so, do you want to join my Leziran Club? After joining the club, you'll be free to decide whether to remain a child or grow up quickly. Ouroboros is also a member of your club, right? Will stared at the badge for a few seconds, then asked, are you really sure he won't hunt me? I'm not sure, but as long as you're a member of the club, my cooperator, then within my field of vision, I will protect you. How about it? Cooperating with me is a good deal, isn't it? In just 1 second, you can escape the situation of being hunted. Roland said this very solemnly, and then, as if he thought of something, he added with a smile. Of course, if one day I fall out with the Sun God faction, then it will probably turn into me and you being hunted together. That doesn't sound very reliable. Will complained. He then took the badge from Roland's palm and put it on his collar. He then pulled out a small mirror from somewhere, looked at himself, and finally nodded in satisfaction, saying, good taste. Of course. Roland smiled, looking at Will and saying, by the way, little Will, here's a tip. The Lord of the Mysteries will be born soon. Don't rush to restart again. Got it, thanks for the reminder. Will nodded. He then tilted his head and glanced at Roland, saying, so, is it Mr. Door or that little friend next to you? I don't know. It depends on whose state is better in the future. Roland spread his hands, then added, currently, Bethel has a greater possibility. So you really can clear the corruption of outer gods. Will mumbled, his expression hard to describe as happy or somewhat lost. He suddenly reached out and patted his chest with a slight sense of confusion, then looked up at Roland and said, I feel like I've lost something. Is it my imagination? Roland blinked, looked at Will, and suddenly said, want to come stay at my place for a few days? Perhaps you'll find what you've lost. So why did you bring another child home? Jack Jones looked at Will next to the main body, then at little Amon, who was curiously staring at Will. He suddenly slapped his head and said, it's over, this is going to turn into a kindergarten. Who is this young gentleman? Klein was both curious and a little investigative. With little Amon as a precedent, he didn't think Lucifer would casually bring an ordinary person home now. This is Will, one of the only 2 Snake of Fates on the path of fate, my ally. By the way, the other Snake of Fate is Ouroboros. Roland, wearing the Lucifer persona, introduced with a smile, Will won't be staying at home permanently, he'll leave in a few days. Not a single mistake, not a single omission, not a single extra character. Tisk. Medici had naturally recognized Will long ago. He glanced at Roland but said nothing. Medici could naturally see why Roland was looking for Will when he already had Ouroboros as a cooperator. Although he was speechless about it, he didn't intend to stop him. After all, with Adam present, Roland being a little cautious was understandable in Medici's eyes. As for Ouroboros, Medici actually didn't really support Ouroboros continuing to advance. Given Ouroboros' state, continued advancement might not be a good thing. Of course, if Ouroboros were to hunt Will, he would not stop him either. Hello, Your Excellency Will. Ask didn't think so much, greeting him with a gentle smile. Chapter 207. Do you know what you gave up? Hello, just call me Will. Will waved his hand casually, his expression turning a little strange as his gaze fell on little Amon. Then, he turned to Roland and said, "You really plan to round up all the heavenly venerate candidates, huh? Are you going to collect a little Zeratul and Antigonus next?" Before coming, Will truly hadn't expected to see little Amon in this house. This was information he hadn't obtained previously. Zeratul doesn't fit my aesthetic, but Antigonus is worth considering. I've wanted to raise a big dog for a long time, Roland replied with a smile. You sound like you're saying something terrifying with a straight face, Will grumbled, his gaze immediately falling on Klein, this time with a hint of hesitation. He looked at Klein, then turned his head to look at Roland, and suddenly said, "You knew all along." "Knew what?" "Your fate." Roland looked at him with a smile. He then opened the blank book Mr. Lucifer carried with him, stopped at a certain page, and said, "If you're referring to the fact that you were originally going to be Klein's angel investor, yes, I knew that fate a long time ago." "You're too nonchalant." Will was choked for a moment. He looked at Klein, then at Roland, and finally sighed dejectedly, saying, "Forget it, I should have known I'm not the kind of person with good luck." Roland smiled upon hearing this. He looked at Will and said, "You can still be Klein's angel investor now, but I'm afraid he isn't willing to walk that path." Roland then looked at Klein and said, "Klein, take Will to pick a room and introduce him to the situation of this house." "Ah, okay, Mr. Lucifer." Klein was stunned for a moment, but despite his confusion, he still nodded and looked at Will hesitantly, saying, "Mr. Will, please follow me. Then let's go. I want a room where I can sunbathe, do you have one?" Will didn't object, nodded, and said after following Klein, "I remember there's still a sun-facing room on the 3rd floor, Mr. Will. You might like it," Klein said, leading the way while recalling. "Then let's go see it. Also, I told you to just call me Will." Will nodded, correcting Klein's address for him again. "Okay, Mr. Will." Klein didn't think much of it either, smiling and nodding, changing his address. The two then arrived at the sun-facing empty room on the 3rd floor. After looking around the room, Will nodded in satisfaction and said, "I like this room. As long as you like it." Klein also breathed a sigh of relief, then continued, "Everything in this room is new, but if you're not used to it or want anything, you can tell Medici or Mr. Isaac later, and they'll bring it back for you next time they go shopping." Will raised his eyebrows upon hearing this, turned his head to look at Klein, and said, "They sound like the parents of this house. Although it's a bit embarrassing to say so, for me, they really are like parental figures." Klein didn't refute, but after a moment of silence, he showed a slightly embarrassed smile and said, "Mr. Isaac often makes me feel like I'm facing my father, and Medici." Klein lowered his voice and said, "Although it's just a teasing nickname, sometimes I also feel like Medici is a male mom, but he doesn't really like this nickname, so it's best not to say it in front of him." Klein didn't deny it. Although he initially felt some resistance towards Mr. Medici because of his attitude towards Jack, after spending some time together, he truly regarded him as a friend, or even an elder. This place, which was originally only a temporary residence, gradually became more and more like a real home as time passed and more members moved in. Of course, Klein would not forget his true parents and relatives, but this did not prevent him from developing new relationships in this brand new era, which was also what his parents hoped for. Ming Rui, don't let us, those who have passed away, trap you. No matter what, you must look forward. Mom doesn't want you to be trapped in past sorrow for your whole life, that would be too tragic. His mother's admonition seemed to echo in his ears again, causing Klein to be slightly lost in thought for a moment. Then he snapped back to reality, looked at Will, and said, "Mr. Lucifer asked me to introduce you to the others. Will, is there anything you want to know?" Will didn't speak immediately upon hearing this. He simply jumped onto a chair and stared at Klein from a condescending position for a while, then suddenly said, "Do you know your original fate?" Klein's smile stiffened, then he nodded and said, "I know, Mr. Lucifer told me." "So why did you give up? Do you know what that means?" Will showed a puzzled expression. As a snake of fate, he could originally glimpse a corner of fate, and having obtained enough information from Roland, it was naturally enough for him to deduce who the original Lord of the Mysteries was. I know. Klein nodded calmly and said, that means supreme power, it means I will become the strongest existence in this world, and it also means I will bear the responsibility of saving the world. Every single one of them, without exception, is in a good mood. But you still gave up. Will said this with a mix of confusion and frustration. Normal people wouldn't give up such a good thing, right? Look at Mr. Dor, and then Amon. Even little Zeratul has a desire for that position. How could you give it up so easily? Strictly speaking, I haven't given up. If this world still needs me to bear the responsibility of saving the world one day in the future, I will still stand up. In fact, I am preparing for it now. Klein shook his head. He looked at Will and retorted, as for that power, that strength. Klein suddenly laughed, his smile carrying genuine ease and contentment, and said, what does that have to do with me? I have never craved these things. For me, being able to live as I am now is very good. I don't deny that my life still has regrets. If becoming a heavenly venerate could make up for these regrets, I would pursue it without hesitation, but unfortunately, it cannot do these things. Then becoming a heavenly venerate only has one meaning for me, saving the world. At this point, Klein showed an embarrassed smile and said, if it truly must be me, then I will certainly not shirk my duty, but the fact is that besides me, Bethel is a better candidate. He is both willing to bear the responsibility of saving the world and has a craving for that power and authority. Since that's the case, why should I compete with Mr. Bethel? Chapter 208 Little Amon is sick. Of course, I don't deny that I also have selfish motives. I fear everything I will face after becoming a celestial worthy, and I fear losing my humanity and no longer being myself. From this perspective, I am just a coward, not as brave as Mr. Bethel. Klein paused here, looked at Will, and suddenly said, so I'm very sorry, Will. I don't know what our relationship was in the original destiny, but I can probably guess a little. I'm very sorry, you probably won't be able to be my angel investor, but Mr. Bethel is also a very good person. If you really have any needs, I can go find Mr. Lucifer and ask him to help you two meet. After staring at Klein for a while, Will suddenly blurted out, you fellow, I probably understand why you can become a great existence. No wonder I invested in you in the original destiny, this is just like me. Ah. Klein was stunned for a moment, not quite understanding what Will was saying. Will didn't explain. He didn't intend to tell the little fellow in front of him that although their personalities were very different, they were consistent in some aspects, such as their low desire for power. For them, some existences were far more important than gaining power. Will just suddenly pulled out a square piece of paper from his pocket and, with a flick of his fingers, folded it into an origami crane. Here. Will handed the origami crane to Klein. Thanks. Klein took the origami crane with a bewildered expression, not quite understanding what it was for. This little trinket can bring you a bit of luck. Although its effect on you might not be great, it's better than nothing. Also, I can locate you through it. If you have anything in the future, you can also find me through it, Will explained. Klein was stunned for a moment, looked down at the origami crane in his hand, and then looked at Will hesitantly, saying, but. No buts. Although you may not necessarily become that existence in the future, you will definitely become an angel, right? Then consider this my investment in recruiting allies in advance. Will interrupted Klein, then jumped off the chair, and looked up at Klein, saying, do you have ice cream? Yes, because both Xiao Amon and I prefer sweets. Mr. Isaac made an extraordinary refrigerator. In short, yes. Klein nodded. He had originally wanted to explain what a refrigerator was, but then realized it couldn't be explained in a few words, so he simply skipped it. As long as you have it, I want 3. Will gestured with his hand to indicate a number. But you're so small, won't eating 3 give you a stomachache? Klein said almost subconsciously. After saying it, he realized that the child in front of him was not a real child, but an angel. So, angels shouldn't get stomachaches from eating ice cream, right? Facts proved that Snake of Fate would not get a stomachache from eating too much ice cream, but Xiao Amon would get a fever from eating too much ice cream. I understand the principle, so why on earth would an angel get a fever from eating too much ice cream? Roland, wearing Jack's vest, watched the overly flushed Xiao Amon swallow the fever-reducing tablet, then turned his head to take the towel Klein handed him and placed it on Xiao Amon's forehead for physical cooling. Perhaps it's because Amon sealed Amon's physical condition to that of an ordinary person for a more realistic ordinary life experience. Klein also didn't quite understand why Amon, an angel, would get a fever. As he speculated, he looked at the sickly Amon lying on the bed and felt a bit of regret. He only knew that he should have stopped Amon when he was eating ice cream with Will. Although Amon is a scumbag, Klein's conscience truly couldn't remain indifferent to a child being sick. It's my fault, I didn't notice the special state of this Amon. Will also stood by the bed, his expression slightly annoyed. So, can't you just use a restart to cure him? Roland looked at Will and asked. His state is very special. If I use a restart on him, it would most likely cause a chain reaction, such as directly restoring his state to an adult. Do you want that? Will shook his head and said. Roland exchanged glances with Klein. The latter was somewhat moved, while the former said without hesitation, then forget it. A mischievous child should learn a lesson when he makes a mistake. I believe after this, Amon won't dare to eat ice cream indiscriminately anymore. If it were anyone else in this situation, Roland would definitely not hesitate, but Amon, Roland stated that he would not show undue softness towards Amon, he was a super scumbag. But, Klein was still a bit hesitant. After all, Amon looked too pitiful. Roland, however, glanced at him and said coldly, Amon is here to experience the life of an ordinary person, and getting sick is part of an ordinary person's life. Since he set Amon to this ordinary person's state, it must be to experience everything of an ordinary person more completely. Interrupting his experience now might be a bad thing. Klein was stunned for a moment, instinctively feeling that something was wrong, but couldn't pinpoint what it was, yet he was strangely convinced. Because Jack's words indeed made a lot of sense. It's just a fever, don't act like he's dying. Medici, who had brought in warm water, almost rolled his eyes. He walked to the bedside, gently patted Amon's cheek, and said, Are you still awake? Little Red Mama. Amon opened his eyes, his gaze slightly bewildered and a little aggrieved, saying, I feel so uncomfortable. Medici looked at Amon like this and fell into a strange silence for a second, then scoffed lightly, saying, Uncomfortable. It should be uncomfortable. Eating 8 ice creams in one go, you truly aren't afraid of death. But, ice cream is delicious. Amon spoke, aggrieved yet stubborn. Just eat yourself to death then. Medici couldn't help but roll his eyes again, then reached out to support Amon's back, bringing the warm water closer to his mouth, and said, Drink some hot water, then sleep again. Your fever isn't serious, and you'll be fine by tomorrow morning. Oh. Amon did not argue further and drank the hot water very obediently. After this, just one person needs to stay and watch. Or so many people crowding into one room trying to show off their presence. Medici then looked at the others in the room, saying irritably, I'll stay and watch. Ask, who had been reading the medicine instructions nearby, raised his hand. All right, then the rest of you go out. Medici immediately made the decision. Facing the powerful aura of the male mom, none of the remaining people objected and all obediently left Amon's room. As for Lucifer, sorry, Lucifer isn't here, he went out for something. Chapter 209, Jack and Lucifer are the same person. After closing the door to Little Crow's room, the group went to the living room. Medici pulled over a chair and sat down, his sharp red eyes looking at the others as he said impatiently, Didn't any of you think to stop Little Crow when he was eating? The three of them looked at each other, and finally Roland spoke on their behalf. We didn't expect an angel to get sick from eating too much ice cream. That's not very mystical. After saying that, Roland paused, then looked at Medici and retorted, could Little Red have expected Amon to get sick from eating too much ice cream? Medici choked a bit, because this matter honestly caught him off guard as well. So much so that when he first heard about it, he initially thought it was a joke or another prank by Little Crow. I really didn't expect it either. Medici didn't deny it, readily admitting his oversight. He then said, Before, I always treated him as a normal Amon. Now it seems perhaps we really should treat him as a child. A normal, naive, fragile child. To be honest, Medici had never imagined before today that Amon would one day be associated with these adjectives. One must know that even during Amon's true infancy, because he was born and king of angels, he had no relation to being normal or fragile. The only thing he could be associated with was perhaps being naive. After all, not even Amon was born a trickster. To be fair, I suspect this is actually Amon's conspiracy. Of course, I'm referring to Amon's true body. He wickedly used a truly fragile infant Amon to dispel our hostility and vigilance towards him, tisk. Roland put forward his idea. This was not malicious speculation, but rather something that brat Amon could indeed do. As expected, one cannot underestimate a god of deceit. My desire to watch a show was instead exploited. Roland sighed in his heart, yet he was neither angry nor annoyed. Instead, he found it even more interesting. After all, what's so fun about a completely obedient doll? It's only when you trick someone like Amon, who seems well behaved but is actually full of bad intentions, that it becomes interesting. Little Crow can indeed do such a thing. Medici pursed his lips, expressing agreement with Roland's speculation. Klein, on the other hand, thought of the contents of Lucifer's diary. He recalled how Amon had corrupted Mr. Lucifer with sugar-coated bullets, and how coldly he had revealed the truth, almost devouring Mr. Lucifer. He also thought of his own subtly changing attitude towards Amon because of Little Crow during this period, and immediately felt cold sweat break out. Amon was indeed still a very terrifying existence. Although I don't know exactly what's going on, I really want to ask what you plan to do next. Will asked, puzzled and curious. Roland and Medici exchanged glances. The former curved his lips into a smile and said, whether Little Crow is being used to soften our attitude or not actually doesn't matter. We just need to do one thing, and that is to raise Little Crow into a good child. After all, isn't that what he hopes for? And then, resist the tyranny of the true body, the world belongs to the clones, understand? Roland blinked, uttering this famous quote. You really like to instigate clones to rebel. Is this some kind of bad taste? Medici couldn't help but complain, thinking of Roland instigating Saussure to rebel against Sun God before. Perhaps because I am also a clone. Roland spread his hands and said. Hearing this, Medici was momentarily stunned. Klein, on the other hand, suddenly looked up at Roland and said, wait, did you accidentally say something incredible? Will showed a curious expression. Haven't I told you? Strictly speaking, I am a clone of a great existence, but now I have separated from the other party and am considered a free person. Roland blinked, not intending to hide it. No, this, Klein was momentarily confused, his words a jumble. He had many things he wanted to say, but felt none of them were quite right. In the end, he could only look at Roland with concern and say, no matter what, everything is over, right? Of course. Otherwise, what you'd be seeing now wouldn't be me, but a guy infinitely worse than Amon. Roland said very frankly. Nyarlathotep was indeed infinitely worse than Amon. Klein breathed a heartfelt sigh of relief, both for his good friend and for this world. He suddenly thought of something else and looked at Roland, saying, wait, if you were once a clone of a great existence, then Mr. Lucifer. Old guy is of course too. Roland said without blinking, his expression unchanged. Unlike you or Sun God, our containers are all clones of great existences, but now we have all broken free from our true bodies and gained freedom. Klein's mind buzzed for a moment, occupied by this explosive information, but he quickly realized that none of this was without trace. For example, Mr. Lucifer's special attitude towards Jack, and their similar habits. Roland, meanwhile, calmly poured himself a cup of coffee and took a sip. His sudden, self-exposure, was naturally to prevent his true identity from being revealed later. After all, Klein was a perceptive existence, and while he was a good actor, it was impossible for him to completely suppress some small habits in daily life. Rather than being caught with his tail exposed and socially dead later, it was better to use a part of the truth to cover up deeper facts. All one mistake, one first, one hair, one inside, one content, in one glance. After all, Roland also knew that he had many flaws. Not to mention, when Klein's sequence got higher, it would be hard for him not to see that Jack and Lucifer's souls both contained great terror. It was better to give a heads up now, as clones of the same great existence, it's normal for their souls to be the same. So Jack, you and Mr. Lucifer are actually the same person. Klein's overloaded brain finally finished loading, and he spoke with some difficulty. No, Jack Jones is Jack Jones, Lucifer is Lucifer. We are certainly from the same great existence, but we are also different individuals. Roland shook his head, stating a great truth in some sense. Hearing this, Klein instinctively breathed a sigh of relief and said, I understand. I won't treat you as the same person. In fact, if you really were the same person, that would be too strange. Klein imagined that possibility, and his expression became a little strange. Think about it, if Jack and Mr. Lucifer were truly the same person, wouldn't that mean his best friend and most respected elder in this world were the same person? The one he usually took care of and who gave him choices in his destiny was also the same person, and the one who treated him like family and for some reason had a lot of opinions about him was still the same person. That would be too strange. Chapter 210 Preschool Teacher Will. Roland said nothing, merely smiling as he took a sip of coffee. He knew it would be difficult for him to drop his disguise again in the future. After all, people only believe the truth they want to believe. Even if Klein truly guessed something, he would most likely choose to avoid it. After all, if it were exposed that Lucifer and Jack were the same person, it wouldn't just be Roland who would be socially dead. While the deceiver might be socially dead, how much better off would the deceived be? Medici averted his eyes, looking a bit disgusted. He genuinely didn't understand Roland's peculiar taste for constantly donning disguises to trick people. Will seemed to recall something, glancing at Roland then at Klein, finally lowering his gaze and saying nothing. As the snake of fate, Will had seen many things and naturally knew certain truths. However, as a smart person, he would certainly say nothing. Let's stop with the heavy topics for now. We should continue discussing the issue of raising Amon. I don't want Amon to come check on the results later and find out we've accidentally killed Amon. That would be too hellish, Roland declared, then stroked his chin, adding. Also, I realized we've been overlooking a blind spot. Although Amon's growth rate is different from ordinary people, he can't just not learn. Does he know how to read now? Hearing this, the few people present exchanged glances. Klein raised his hand and said, Amon can't read newspapers, so he probably doesn't know how to read. Alright, so we'll have to start from preschool. Roland spread his hands, then looked up at Medici and said, Little Red's mom, this matter. Don't look at me. I don't have the patience to teach Amon to read. Medici interrupted before Roland could finish, saying, if you're relying on me, you might as well do it yourself. You're a teacher, aren't you? But I'm not a preschool teacher either. Roland mumbled, finally turning his gaze to Will, smiling, Will, you frequently restart, so you should know a lot about early childhood education. Will. No, was he, the dignified snake of fate, here to be a preschool teacher? Please, this is Amon. Don't you want to hear Amon obediently call you teacher Will? Roland continued to press before Will could refuse. Will fell silent because he found himself genuinely a little tempted. Please, that's Amon. Which existence, having been messed with by Amon, could refuse to be Amon's teacher? What? You ask if Will had been messed with by Amon? Of course, absolutely. There isn't an angel in this world who hasn't been messed with by Amon. I can only try to teach him. Whether it will be successful is hard to say, Will said, carefully choosing his words after a few seconds of thought. As it turned out, Little Red's mom's prediction was correct. The next day, Amon's fever broke, and he was once again a lively, bouncing child. However, this liveliness didn't last long, as Amon soon wilted again when his dear Little Red's mom told him he was already 4 years old, a big child, and should start school. Then Medici introduced Will, the freshly minted preschool teacher, to Amon, along with study materials taller than Amon himself. Even though he had never attended school, at that moment, Amon understood the feelings of countless students, looking at the study materials before him and feeling as if the sky had fallen. But I can only live for 100 days, what's the point of learning all this? Amon clearly still wanted to struggle, posing a profound question. Will, the preschool teacher, who was flipping through the lesson plan, glanced at the others nearby. Although he didn't speak, his eyes clearly said, is this how you guys fool this Amon? You can't say that. As the saying goes, if one learns the truth in the morning, one can die in the evening without regret. Learning is a way of life. Whether you can live for 100 years or only 100 days, you must not forget to learn, Roland said, not feeling guilty at all, but rather self-righteously. Amon, didn't you realize that in this family, whether it's me, or Klein, or Medici, or Ask, none of us have ever stopped learning. This was a fact. To say something that might be counterintuitive, even Medici, who seemed the least cultured and patient, would usually read newspapers to gather intelligence, peruse ancient texts to understand hidden histories, and even study the updated knowledge in the field of mysticism of this era with Ask. Medici simply didn't like to write, but that didn't mean he didn't learn. The others were even more so. It could be said that all members of this family so far, except for Amon, loved to learn. Amon paused, then wrinkled his small face, likely recalling the daily routines of the others, and then dejectedly realized that Roland hadn't lied. What he said seemed to be all true. Roland then continued, Amon, do you want to be illiterate? I don't want to be illiterate. Amon shook his head, his expression becoming firm, but upon seeing the study materials that were taller than him, his firm expression wavered. He whispered, but this is too much. You're not meant to finish it in one day. Take your time learning, Roland said with a smile, then reached out and ruffled Amon's head. Every single word, every single sentence, every single paragraph, every single piece of content, I've checked them one by one. Klein, standing nearby, curiously pulled out a book from the pile of study materials, and then froze. Because the title of that book was, Das Kapital. Holy crap, where did this come from? Klein looked at the book in his hand, which was clearly not printed through official channels, and couldn't help but look up at Roland, asking, Jack, where did this book come from? The old guy transcribed it and had someone print it separately. It was just finished yesterday. Originally, it was meant to support Little Red's business, but it just so happened that I also slipped a copy into Amon's study materials, Roland answered candidly. After deciding to use Lucifer's disguise to give speeches and gain presence, he had been making time for this. Yesterday, when Amon was sick, Lucifer wasn't around because he was busy with this matter. Awesome. Klein didn't know what to say for a moment, only able to use this simple yet clear word to express his inner shock. But isn't it too early to show Amon this book? Can he understand it? Klein thought of something else, glanced at the 4-year-old Amon, and said tactfully. It's okay if he doesn't understand it. Even just leaving an impression is good. And don't forget, although Amon is only 4 today, he'll grow up in a few days, so learning this really isn't too early, Roland said with a smile. Klein was silent for a few seconds, having to admit that Jack was right. He then, with a somewhat complex mood, began to flip through the strange yet familiar book, and even though it wasn't the first time he had seen it, he couldn't help but become engrossed in it once more. Roland watched his clearly engrossed expression without surprise, as when he handed the book to Medici that morning, the other party had a similar reaction. Some ideas, even across time and space, still deeply fascinate people. Chapter 211, Visiting Lilith mistyped chapter name. So what exactly is this book? Will, the only outsider, asked in confusion. A book about social forms. Roland smiled, looked at Will, and said, if you're interested, you can read it later. It's a very interesting book. Although he was engrossed in reading, Das Kapital, life had to go on, so besides reading, Klein continued his detective life as usual, taking on commissions to earn money. Just like that, Klein received a missing person commission from his detective friend. Is Emmeline White still alive? Klein sat on the sofa, flipping through the material his detective friend sent him, while pulling a gold coin from his pocket and tossing it into the air. The coin landed heads up, indicating an affirmative answer. Emmeline White was indeed still alive, but his whereabouts were unknown. Emmeline White. Just as Klein was wondering if he had any way to find Emmeline White's whereabouts, Roland, wearing Jack's vest, sat down next to him with a cup of coffee. The latter casually glanced at the information in Klein's hand, and after seeing the name and photo on the document, he smiled and said, "Are you looking for him? You know him?" Klein suddenly realized that he seemed to have forgotten that Jack was a local Backland native with extensive connections. "I know him, but he doesn't know me." Roland shook his head, then nodded, and said with a smile, "Emmeline White is a bloodkin. He's quite famous in their circle, a shut-in obsessed with dolls, to the point where he once lost his entire fortune because of it. As far as I know, he's not a bad person. At most, he goes to hospitals to steal blood vials to drink." Klein nodded with a strange expression upon hearing this, saying, I see. Then he probably is quite famous. In this era, being obsessed with dolls was still a niche hobby. For a vampire to be so engrossed in it, even to the point of losing his fortune, it was normal for him to be famous. What happened to him? Roland asked, feigning ignorance. He's been missing for a while now. Klein then briefly explained how Emmeline White's parents had commissioned a detective to find him. Missing, huh? Roland pinched his chin, pretending to think. A few seconds later, he said, given Emmeline White's personality, it's unlikely he'd actively cause trouble. And since you divined that he's not dead, it means he's most likely being held captive. In that case, could Emmeline White have been caught by an official Beander? That's possible. Klein also thought of this, and his expression showed a hint of helplessness and sympathy. After all, in this era, it was not a good thing for a wild Beander to fall into official hands. Even if they hadn't committed any crimes, they might be used as test subjects to test the effects of various sealed artifacts. There was no other way. The existence of wild Beanders was like a ticking bomb. Even if they didn't commit crimes, there was no knowing when they might explode. In such circumstances, the official attitude was bound to be stricter. You don't have to be too pessimistic. If Emmeline White fell into the hands of the Church of Evernight, the god of steam and machinery, or the Storm Church, then he'd definitely be finished. But Backland isn't just these three major churches. If I remember correctly, Backland also has a small church belonging to the Earth Mother Church. If Emmeline White was caught by them, it might actually be a good thing for him, Roland said, pinching his chin. Why? Klein was stunned, clearly not understanding why Roland would say that. Because the Earth Mother Church has always had a tradition of raising and recruiting bloodkin into their faith. Roland explained simply, then smiled and said, if we want to know if that's the answer, we'll know once we visit the fertility church. His expression was eager. He had long wanted to visit Lilith. After all, she was a healer, and her skills were precisely what Roland lacked. Moreover, it's such a waste for Beanders of the planter and pharmacist pathways to engage in fighting and killing, Roland couldn't help but mutter in his heart. One is clearly a chosen agriculturalist, and the other can advance medical progress. If he were to choose which pathway's abilities he personally desired most among all the pathways, it would definitely be the door pathway. However, if he were to consider societal development and reform, Roland would undoubtedly choose the Earth and Moon pathways. After all, food is the paramount concern of the people. If Beanders of the Earth pathway could research and develop high-yield crops to solve the world's famine problem, that would truly benefit countless people. Don't think this is impossible. Frank in the original work could research mushrooms that could grow in the dark, solving the City of Silver's food problem, which is enough to show that the extraordinary abilities of this world can indeed be used to improve crops. And the Moon pathway is a typical healer pathway. Even an Emmeline White could alleviate Mrs. Doris's condition with potions. If they pooled their wisdom and gathered the strength of an entire pathway, who's to say they couldn't research potions to treat various incurable diseases? If medicine advanced rapidly, it would definitely be a great thing for humanity. Perhaps they could even research various genetic potions and discover the path of biological ascension. After all, this world no longer has oil, and the middle part of the normal tech tree is broken. We have to try if we can find other paths. Roland thought this, then remembered the Rosal Memorial exhibition a few days later, and the god of steam and machinery. Not a single word, not a single character, not a single detail was overlooked. Of course, the path of extraordinary technology can also be tried. Although extraordinary characteristics are limited, extraordinary items are not necessarily made only with characteristics. Ordinary spiritual materials can also be used, though their shelf life is limited, but what does that matter? The only major problem is how to mass-produce them. Roland thought for a few seconds and felt that it was better to leave these problems to professionals, such as a certain Mr. Rosal, to consider. Of course, for scientific research to progress, a bit of luck is also essential. Roland suddenly thought of something else, glanced at Will, who was teaching little Amon words not far away, and curled his lips. To be honest, Roland always felt that there was a huge waste in the application of extraordinary abilities in this world. Basically, everyone was just fighting and killing. Even the seer pathway, which should have focused on technology, seemed to have a final destiny of fighting and killing. But in reality, seers can advance the tech tree, mystics are natural educators, planters are the kings of agriculture, pharmacists can promote medical progress, apprentices solve transportation problems, and the good luck brought by monsters is clearly a scientific research tool. Even the storm-old doves can act as weather regulators, solving some climate disasters. As a result, everyone now only knows how to fight and kill. It's such a waste, I can't even bear to watch it anymore. Roland sighed with emotion, muttering, that's why this world needs change even more. Chapter 212, Mushroom King Frank. Of course, Roland didn't deny the importance of combat power at all. In fact, he deeply understood its significance. Not to mention the situation on Earth, without sufficient combat power, facing outer deities would only mean death. What Roland was dissatisfied with was that many pathways, which were clearly not meant for direct combat and could have been better utilized in other areas besides frontal battlefields, had still been molded into combat-oriented forms under the current societal circumstances, their minds filled only with the thrill of fighting, thereby wasting the unique characteristics of their respective pathways. But this cannot be blamed on them. Ultimately, it is the fault of this world, the threat of the apocalypse, an unreasonable system, and an unsafe environment. Under such circumstances, fighting naturally becomes the top priority. Roland clicked his tongue inwardly. He wasn't overly concerned with societal progress, but seeing the Beyonders of the Lord of Mysteries world waste their talents always made him feel a bit antsy, wanting to steer them back onto the right track. Perhaps it was a form of obsessive-compulsive disorder. However, speaking of which, the pathways of Earth and Moon have significant problems. It's unknown how many people on these two pathways have been influenced by outer deities. Tisk, what a hindrance. Indeed, outer deities are the biggest obstacle to this world getting better. Roland pondered for a few seconds, pinching his chin, then looked at Klein and said, Sherlock, let's go to Fertility Church now. The sooner we confirm Emmeline White's whereabouts, the sooner you can complete your commission. All right. Klein was already accustomed to Jack's decisive actions and nodded. As the two were about to leave, they saw Mr. Lucifer descending from the second floor. Are you two going out? Mr. Lucifer looked up at them. This was naturally the result of Roland's manipulation. After all, negotiating with Lilith was more suitable for Mr. Lucifer, and Jack could just enjoy the show from the sidelines. Yes. Roland, in Jack's persona, nodded and said with a smile, we're going to Fertility Church. A vampire named Emmeline White has gone missing, and we suspect he was captured by Fertility Church. Mr. Lucifer, are you also planning to go out? Klein asked casually. Yes, I'll go to Fertility Church with you, Mr. Lucifer nodded, his expression showing no surprise. X2. The two little ones in the living room both froze for a moment, though one was feigning surprise and the other was genuinely surprised. Old guy, why are you going to Fertility Church? Roland asked with a curious expression. Klein also looked at Mr. Lucifer with curiosity. Mr. Lucifer looked at them and said with a smile, I have something to discuss with Earth Mother. Klein's expression grew even more curious upon hearing this. He couldn't help but ask, Mr. Lucifer, may I ask what you plan to discuss with Earth Mother? Yeah, what are you going to talk about, old guy? Tell us. Roland chimed in from the side, always serious about maintaining his persona. Just about an alliance. Mr. Lucifer's gaze swept over the two of them. He didn't say much, only stating, as for other matters, you will know when you are supposed to. Oh. Klein was a bit disappointed but didn't ask further. You're so stingy, old guy, Jack grumbled. The three then set off and soon arrived near Fertility Church by trackless carriage. Compared to St. Samuel Cathedral, Sea Wave Cathedral, and Lever Cathedral, which belong to the three major churches of Night, Storm, and Steam and are also located in Backland, Fertility Church was undoubtedly much smaller. It was golden in color, with the holy emblem of life, composed of wheat ears, flowers, and springs, carved on its outer walls. At a glance, there were few believers, making it seem quite deserted. Roland, in Mr. Lucifer's persona, looked up at the emblem symbolizing Earth Mother and smiled, but he wasn't in a hurry to enter. After all, Roland was very curious if Evernight Goddess had shared information about him with her beloved allies. This was very important, as it concerned whether he and Lilith could have a smooth discussion, and also how Roland should talk to Lilith. Although Klein didn't quite understand why Mr. Lucifer was standing outside Fertility Church and not entering, as someone who knew his place, he naturally wouldn't enter Fertility Church by himself under such circumstances, so he simply waited with Mr. Lucifer at the entrance. Sherlock, do you think 300 man-eating mushrooms will pop out of Fertility Church and capture us later? While waiting, Roland even had the leisure to tell Klein some jokes under Jack's persona. Shouldn't it be 300 axemen? What the hell are man-eating mushrooms? Klein retorted in confusion. You don't understand this. As the saying goes, death has its fungi. Man-eating mushrooms are a famous specialty of the Earth pathway, a must-try, Roland said earnestly. Quote. Klein obviously didn't understand Roland's words. He only shivered and said, is that a cold joke? No, let me introduce you to our famous mushroom king, Mr. Frank, who is dedicated to crossbreeding wheat and cows, a genius and madman coexisting. Roland enthusiastically began to educate Klein about Frank's existence. After he finished his introduction, he heard a deep, gentle voice from not far away. Every single word and sentence is flawless. Frank is indeed a genius, but some of his ideas are truly too wild. The church has always been very worried that he might do something crazy that would bring disaster to this world. Klein, who was internally shocked by Frank's various deeds, suddenly looked up and saw a tall figure. It was a man in a brown priest's robe, over 2 meters too tall, with a strong and burly build. Standing there, he made one think of a legendary giant. Undoubtedly, this was Bishop Utravsky, the bishop of Fertility Church. So tall. Klein looked up at the other party, feeling his neck ache a little. I think Frank is quite good the way he is. Genius on the left, madman on the right. What's more, this world is inherently accompanied by madness. Whether it's you or I, can we truly be called normal people? Roland, in Jack's persona, smiled and looked at the other party. Bishop Utravsky showed a thoughtful expression upon hearing this, then nodded and said, I do not deny your point, but I believe Mother Goddess had a profound reason for Frank to leave the church. Perhaps that is his destiny. All right, it seems you're a fatalist. Roland shrugged, unsurprised by this. He had long known that Bishop Utravsky was a fanatical believer of Earth Mother, routinely emphasizing that everything was Mother Goddess's guidance. It was probably because of this that Bishop Utravsky became Earth Mother's favored one. Bishop Utravsky then looked at Mr. Lucifer, bowed, and said, Your Highness Lucifer, Mother Goddess's will has descended upon this church. Please follow me. Chapter 213 Hello, Ms. Lilith. All right, Mr. Lucifer said with a smile, clearly understanding that Earth Mother was expressing her Zhangxi for him, or rather, that Earth Mother was probably very eager to talk to him. It seemed Evernight Goddess had indeed shared a lot of information with her allies. The three then followed Bishop Utravsky into the Fertility Church. Upon reaching the main hall, Bishop Utravsky did not rush to lead Mr. Lucifer to Earth Mother. He turned to Klein and Jack Jones and said, Please wait here for a moment, both of you. Evidently, Earth Mother intended to speak with Mr. Lucifer alone. You two stay here. Don't worry, I'll be back very soon, Mr. Lucifer said, looking back at them. Klein and Jack exchanged glances, then obediently found a place to sit in the hall. Roland, who was wearing Mr. Lucifer's persona, followed Bishop Utravsky into the true interior of the Fertility Church and soon arrived before a door. Bishop Utravsky opened the door for Roland, revealing a potted plant in the center of the room. Bishop Utravsky respectfully bowed and saluted the potted plant, murmuring words of praise, then deferentially stepped aside. Roland examined the potted plant, immediately understanding what was happening. A portion of Earth Mother's will had descended upon this plant, somewhat similar to a divine descent but without much power. It seemed Earth Mother truly wanted to speak with him. Thinking this, Roland stepped into the room. Click. The door automatically closed as he entered. Roland didn't mind, merely looking at the potted plant and smiling as he said, Nice to meet you, Ms. Lilith. Do I need to introduce myself? You are indeed, as Knight said, knowledgeable about many secrets. After a few seconds of silence, the flower inside the potted plant suddenly opened, emitting a soft and charming feminine voice. I'm curious, how did Knight introduce me to you? Roland asked with a slight smile and a hint of curiosity in his expression. Knight shared your intelligence with me. It wasn't much, but at least it let me know what kind of existence you are, the flower-carrying Liliths will continued. So I know you can summon that ancient sun god from the distant past, and I also know you helped Bethel, clearing some of the pollution from him, allowing him to regain a moment of clarity. Oh, hey, it seems you truly are inseparable. Roland chuckled, not surprised by Lilith's words. After all, the existence of ancient sun god would not be a secret tonight. He even specifically pulled ancient sun god to the Church of Storms to call Leodoro, and given Old Pigeon's style, he would most likely share this information with Evernight Goddess. As for Bethel's matter, it was even less of a secret. Evernight Goddess was already paying close attention to him, and it would be strange if she didn't notice his changes with a little extra observation. We are naturally close allies, the flower-carrying Lilith's will said. Though it had no expression, it inexplicably brought to mind a polite, fake smile. Indeed, after all, you two are capable of jointly plotting the famous backstabbing of War God. Poor War God, he still doesn't know his mother was replaced long ago. This, even among the many stories I know, is an absolute. Roland paused here before uttering a single word. Hell joke. The flower-carrying Lilith's will fell silent again. After a moment, it spoke. Let's both be frank, Mr. Lucifer. You didn't come to the fertility church today just to chat about everyday matters. I'm afraid War God wouldn't appreciate such everyday matters. Roland shook his head, then smiled and said unhurriedly, shouldn't it be Ms. Lilith who is being frank? Roland's gaze fell on the potted plant. He extended his hand and lightly pressed it over a leaf on the plant, then shook his head, as if sighing with emotion. What a familiar aura. The last time I felt this aura was when I was clearing Bethel's pollution. Ms. Lilith, I'm very curious how much of your will truly belongs to you now. Roland asked, his expression like a scholar exploring an academic problem. If one were to ask what distinguishes the Earth and Moon pathways most clearly from other pathways, there is undoubtedly only one answer: the influence from outer gods. Although more than just these two pathways on Earth once belonged to outer gods, only these two pathways belonged to another pillar-level existence. This made it very easy for Mother Goddess of Depravity to influence beyonders of these two pathways, and it also caused Lilith, the former progenitor of the blood race, to even choose to die once in the second epoch to escape the influence. Lilith had succeeded once. Death and jumping from the Moon pathway to the Earth pathway greatly reduced the outer gods' influence on her. But she also failed, because this influence was not eradicated. It still followed Lilith like a shadow, growing more severe as the apocalypse approached. It's hard to say that if this continues, Lilith won't become another bound god Torzin. I don't know, the flower-carrying Lilith's will did not deny Roland's words. It said, as I am now, I don't even know myself sometimes whether my will stems from myself or from the influence of that outer god. So I need your help, Mr. Lucifer, Lilith said, no longer probing. This time she spoke very directly. If you can suppress the outer god's power and clear the outer god's pollution, that is precisely what I need. Every single word, every single sentence, every single expression, every single detail, everything is perfect. For this, I can pay any price, as long as I have it. No one wants to die, and becoming an outer god's puppet would only be worse than death. Although Lilith was prepared to make a big explosion against the Mother Goddess during the apocalypse and had the resolve to die, who wouldn't want to live if they could? Roland raised an eyebrow at this, not surprised. He simply said, to be honest, I can indeed clear pollution from outer gods, but that method might not work for you. What I can clear is power, not will. Unlike Mr. Dorr and others who were simply polluted by outer gods, Lilith's situation was actually closer to, the original has awakened within me. However, both the original and celestial worthy had fallen, while Mother Goddess of Depravity, as the third pillar, was still alive and well. Although Roland's power could forcefully clear pollution from outer gods, it wasn't very effective against the will inherent in Beander characteristics. The flower-carrying Lilith's will fell silent again, this time for longer than usual. Being able to clear the power is enough, at least it will allow me to last longer. Lilith finally spoke again, her tone a mix of relief and subtle disappointment. No, what I mean is, why not try another method? Roland said with a smile. Chapter 214 The Transaction Between Roland and Lilith. What? Lilith was clearly a little confused. The root of your corruption is ultimately due to the mother goddess of depravity, so why not directly resolve her from the root? Roland didn't keep him in suspense. His smile brightened a bit as he said, if that outer god falls, even if there's still a possibility of her return, you'd be much more at ease, wouldn't you? Resisting the will of a pillar who has already fallen is a completely different concept from resisting a pillar who is still alive. Killing the mother goddess, while not able to completely eradicate the corruption, could at least minimize its impact. I cannot kill her. Lilith was probably startled by Roland's words, her tone becoming complex, with hesitation, surprise, and even a hint of probing. I can help you, Roland said with a smile, watching the flower that carried Lilith's will. He said, of course, not now. When I reach the end of my path, I can help you kill that outer god. Roland wasn't just talking nonsense. He was confident that after fully digesting the fragments of Nyarlathotep's power within him, he wouldn't be weaker than any pillar. As for the mother goddess seemingly being unkillable, others might not be able to do it, but Roland might. In essence, Nyarlathotep's power would only be superior to the pillar-level beings of this world. As for why Roland wanted to kill the mother goddess of depravity, wasn't it obvious? Roland had bombed that mother goddess countless times. Other outer gods might not have a grudge against Roland, merely wanting to invade Earth and acquire source material, but once that mother goddess's barrier disappeared, she would 100% come looking for trouble with Roland. So, Roland naturally had to strike first. Of course, Roland wouldn't regret bombing the mother goddess. After all, she was the main force attacking Earth. Even if he didn't bomb her, when the apocalypse arrived and the barrier disappeared, he would still have to fight her. Since that was the case, it was better to gain more of his own combat power from her. How long will that take? Lilith didn't question Roland's words, only asked. I don't know, perhaps you need to wait patiently. Roland smiled, not making any direct empty promises. He said, however, Miss Lilith, rest assured, I am a very conscientious businessman. Before delivering the product, I don't mind giving you some freebies. Lilith didn't ask what the freebies were, as the answer was already obvious. She only asked, what do I need to pay? I am leading a revolution, a war that will reform the entire world. You should know that a war can never lack food and doctors. Roland smiled and said, and if this society wants to truly become beautiful, it must also be built on sufficiently abundant resources, the most important of which are food and medical care. There are many things a person needs to live in this world, and among the indispensable are food and medical care. People will die if they don't eat, and people will die if they get sick and are not treated. Besides these two, while others are also important, most can be managed. So the Earth Mother Church is very important to me. I need Beyonders from the Earth and Moon pathways to do something. Roland spoke very directly. He smiled and said, of course, you can refuse, just as I can refuse you. But I believe neither of us will do that. Lilith fell silent because she saw the seriousness and hidden meaning in Roland's words. He needed Beyonders from the Earth and Moon pathways, but he didn't necessarily need her, the Earth Mother Goddess. Considering her current dire situation, Roland wouldn't even need to do anything. If he didn't offer help, she would probably be finished at the latest by the apocalypse. At that time, Roland could even effortlessly acquire what he needed. However, this would obviously have some hidden dangers. After all, the Beyonders of the Earth Mother Church were all Lilith's believers. Without the Earth Mother Goddess, even if Roland took them in, he might not be able to command them due to issues of faith. Pious believers are truly willing to die for the God they believe in. That's why the other party said, I believe neither of us will do that, because with her, the Earth Mother Goddess's cooperation, it would obviously be much simpler to command the believers of the Earth Mother Church to do things. I cannot fully trust you. Lilith said after a moment of thought. I don't need you to fully trust me, Miss Lilith. As I said, I am a conscientious businessman. I will not ask you to pay the full price before the transaction is complete. Roland said unhurriedly. We can gradually deepen our trust in each other. I will give you freebies, or perhaps you wouldn't mind paying me a deposit. Roland originally didn't expect Lilith to easily put all the people of the Earth Mother Church on the gambling table just by chatting with him. After all, he couldn't kill the Mother Goddess of Depravity or completely resolve Lilith's predicament in a short time. In this situation, unless Lilith was a naive sweet girl, she wouldn't foolishly put all her chips in. Roland's intention from beginning to end was just to first complete the mutual probing between him and Lilith and reach a preliminary transaction. Klein and Jack were chatting with Emmeline White. The situation was like this: they were both bored, waiting in the hall, when Jack suddenly heard some movement. He pulled Klein to the living area behind the church and then discovered Emmeline White locked in the basement. So, you can gain freedom just by converting to the Earth Mother Goddess. Why not do that? Jack Jones showed a curious expression, as if he had become that sunny and cheerful, simple college student again. Bah, you are insulting my piety towards the ancestor. I will absolutely not believe in the Earth Mother Goddess. Even if this hateful priest locks me up for life, I will absolutely not yield. Emmeline White seemed to be humiliated, his voice becoming agitated. Really? I don't believe it. Jack Jones expressed his doubt, smiling, unless you write it down. Klein glanced at his little friend upon hearing this. Although there was no evidence, his intuition told him that the other party was definitely up to no good. Write it down. Emmeline White probably didn't expect Jack to say that, and was clearly stunned for a moment. That's right. Otherwise, anyone can say empty words. Only by writing it down will it have some credibility. Jack Jones continued with a smile, otherwise, I have reason to believe you are just bragging. Okay, write it down then. I'm telling you, my faith in the ancestor is absolutely not something you can question. Emmeline White, provoked like this, said without any hesitation. What are you doing? Just then, Bishop Utravsky's voice came from the corridor behind them. Bishop Utravsky, we are discussing whether Emmeline White will convert to the Earth Mother Goddess. Jack Jones turned around, briefly recounted what had just happened in a few words, and finally looked at Bishop Utravsky and asked, Mr. Bishop, do you have paper and a pen here? I'd like to borrow them. Chapter 215 The Blood Clan Being Sold. Bishop Utravsky fell silent for a second, probably not expecting things to develop this way, but he didn't comment on it, only nodding and saying, I have paper and a pen in my room that I can lend to you. However, you cannot enter the place where Emmeline White is imprisoned. If you need me to, I can do it for you. Evidently, because of the Earth Mother, Bishop Utravsky was very friendly towards the two who came with Mr. Lucifer. Thank you very much, Bishop, Jack Jones said with a smile. Klein's gaze fell on Mr. Lucifer, who was next to Bishop Utravsky. He was curious about what Mr. Lucifer had discussed with the Earth Mother, but due to Mr. Lucifer's previous words, he didn't ask further. You can slowly play games with this bloodline here. I have something to do and need to leave first. Roland, disguised as Lucifer, looked at Klein and said with a smile, Sherlock, you can talk to Bishop Utravsky. This might lead to a good outcome for both of you. Klein was a bit puzzled, but before he could ask, Lucifer had already disappeared, leaving him only able to look curiously at Bishop Utravsky. Bishop Utravsky was also clearly a bit puzzled. He paused for a moment as if he had thought of something and said, There's something I've always wanted to entrust to someone else for help. What is it? Klein asked curiously, looking at Bishop Utravsky. Kill me. Bishop Utravsky's main point was to shock people to death, but fortunately, he then explained. It turned out that Bishop Utravsky was once a great pirate, but later he turned over a new leaf and became a bishop of the Earth Mother Church, starting to do good deeds. However, perhaps because the difference between his first half of life and his second half was too great, Bishop Utravsky developed a split personality, with an evil personality representing his past. Therefore, he had always wanted to entrust others to help him kill the evil personality. After listening to Bishop Utravsky's story, Klein understood what Mr. Lucifer's words meant. As a Sequence 7 magician, Klein had been looking for opportunities to perform during this period to digest the magician potion, and helping Bishop Utravsky eliminate his secondary personality was clearly an opportunity. Moreover, Bishop Utravsky was not a stingy person. If someone could help him eliminate his secondary personality, Bishop Utravsky would also give generous rewards. The two parties happily reached an agreement. With Klein's help, Bishop Utravsky's secondary personality was eliminated, and he was reborn. After being reborn, Bishop Utravsky did not forget his promise to Jack Jones. Thus, the written pledge from Emmeline White stating he would absolutely not convert to the Earth Mother, fell into Jack Jones's hands. After the two left the fertility church, Klein studied the newly acquired skeleton key for a while before looking at his companion next to him and finally couldn't help but ask, "Jack, why exactly did you want Emmeline White to make that written pledge?" Well, Roland, disguised as Jack, blinked and waved at Klein, signaling him to come closer before lowering his voice and saying, "The old guy once told me the true name of the Earth Mother." He paused here before uttering a name. Lilith. Klein was stunned for a moment. Of course, he knew the name Lilith. In the records of City of Silver, it belonged to the ancestor of the bloodline. So, the Earth Mother is the ancestor of the bloodline. She didn't fall but changed her disguise. Does anyone else know about this? Why would the Earth Mother do this? Although important information was missing, Klein still sensed a potentially huge conspiracy hidden within, thanks to his keen intuition. Otherwise, there would be no need for Lilith to conceal her true identity to become the Earth Mother. There's definitely a conspiracy, but what exactly it is has nothing to do with us. Roland naturally saw what Klein was thinking. He spread his hands and said with a smile, "However, this matter itself does need to be kept secret. Don't go spreading it around." "How could I possibly spread it around?" Klein smiled helplessly, then shook his head and suppressed the doubts in his heart. Because Jack was right, no matter what kind of conspiracy was behind the bloodline ancestor changing her disguise, it had nothing to do with him for now. He should focus on how to digest the magician potion as soon as possible and advance to sequence 6. At the same time, a visitor arrived at the bloodline's base in Backland. "Good day, everyone. I hope my visit isn't too abrupt." Roland, disguised as Lucifer, smiled as he looked at the bloodline in front of him, who, despite his handsome appearance, was already very old inside, and spoke. "Good day, Your Highness Lucifer. The Ancestor's revelation has revealed your arrival to us." Nebe Adra bowed, his voice as old as his age, and a string of compliments poured out as soon as he opened his mouth. That's right, this was the deposit Lilith paid. After Roland performed a pollution cleansing for her, Lilith very simply and decisively sold out this group of bloodline in Backland. In her words, the Earth Mother Church was not the mainstream faith in Loan after all. If a large number of members left the Fineport Kingdom, it would inevitably attract the attention of the Loan authorities. Moreover, the Beyonders of the Earth Mother Church currently needed to maintain order in the Beyonder domain within the Fineport Kingdom, and withdrawing too many at once could easily lead to chaos. And this group of bloodline already lived within Loan. Even if they became active, it wouldn't cause extra attention, and they were usually idle anyway, so it was better to let them work for Roland first. Roland had no objection to this, as long as there were people to use, he wasn't picky. After all, this was just a deposit. Of course, the Earth Mother Church would later send another batch of food and medicinal materials as part of the first deposit. "There's no need for compliments," Roland interrupted Nebe Adra, looking at him and smiling. "Give me the roster of all bloodline in Backland." "Your Highness, this may take some time to organize." Nebe Adra spoke with a slight hesitation. Although the bloodline were much more united than other Beyonders, and Nebe Adra, as the head of the bloodline group in Backland, knew how many bloodline were in Backland, there was no formal list. And it was also clear that His Highness Lucifer wouldn't just want a name from the roster, basic information would certainly be required as well. "Then go do it now. I want to see the complete roster before tomorrow morning." Roland smiled at Nebe Adra. His smile was gentle, but it made the latter break out in a cold sweat. "Please rest assured, I will arrange for people to do it immediately," Nebe Adra said almost instinctively. Chapter 216 Will I Become a Mushroom Man? The number of vampires living in Backland isn't too large. After all, their racial characteristics dictate that vampires start at sequence 7. Normally, a pair of vampire spouses would only choose to have a newborn when they obtained an additional sequence 7 characteristic, or when they were on the verge of death. In this world where Beyonder characteristics are conserved, such characteristics destined the overall number of vampires to never be too large. Fortunately, precisely because everyone started at sequence 7, although the number of vampires was not large, their quality was high, which made Roland quite satisfied. Although the war hasn't started yet, preparatory work for medical care can undoubtedly begin. Even if the Beyonder potions cannot be stored for a long time, preparing the ingredients for their concoction in advance is better than gathering them at the last minute. Moreover, there aren't only Beander potions, ordinary potions are also very important. Roland flipped through the thick stack of documents submitted by Nebe Adra, which included information on vampires living in Backland, as well as their various assets in Backland. Roland read through all the documents from beginning to end, then suddenly sighed with a hint of disappointment. There aren't the kind of talents I'm looking for. Roland was truly disappointed. He had originally expected there to be a talent like Frank among the vampires, but unfortunately, while there were many oddities among the vampires, there wasn't a single one who could be called a talent. As expected, I still need to search worldwide. Scientific research cannot proceed without a leader, Roland pondered, stroking his chin, deciding to have someone gather information on scientific researchers in fields such as medicine and biology later. After all, considering that the god of steam and machinery, a sequence 0, actually needed Rosal, this heaven-sent strong man, to help advance the technology tree, one knows that although the various Beander pathways into the Lord of Mysteries world have extraordinary potential, most Beyonders only know how to rigidly apply their abilities without innovative spirit when there is no one to lead them. For Roland, this was unacceptable. Without an innovative spirit, how could one research the Lord of Mysteries of the human body, overcome difficult problems in the medical field, and unlock the skill tree of biological ascension? Roland was still very optimistic about the potential of the human body itself. The Beander abilities in this world are difficult to popularize due to the law of conservation of Beander characteristics, but if the secrets of genes could be cracked, perhaps everyone could become a Superman in the future. Even if that level cannot be achieved, improving human physical fitness by a notch is a good thing. As for why Roland suddenly became interested in this aspect, one can only say that since he's already here, with such excellent conditions available, not pursuing some scientific research projects would feel like a terrible waste to Roland. However, it's not as if there are no existing talents. Although Mushroom King's stereotype is solving food production problems, he actually has very profound research in both animal and plant fields, it's just. Roland was uncharacteristically hesitant. He was certain of Frank's ability. The original work proved Mushroom King's capability by solving City of Silver's food problem under limited conditions. Roland hesitated about whether entrusting the heavy responsibility of biological ascension to Frank would truly not lead to the Mushroom People path in the future. But, you know, Mushroom People seem quite interesting too. Roland pondered for a moment, imagining everyone turning into Mushroom People, and couldn't help but smile. Then he made a decision in his heart. Without madness, there is no survival. To carve out a unique evolutionary path in such a world cannot be too normal in the first place. Talents should be used when needed. It just so happens that I'm preparing to reunite Rosal and his daughter, so I'll even save the trouble of finding someone. I'll just have Bernadette contact Catlia. Bernadette was somewhat restless. This made her almost instinctively turn her head to look at the Kingdom Museum not far away. Currently, a long queue stretched in front of the Kingdom Museum, all people who had come to visit the Rosal Memorial Exhibition. Due to the ambiguous attitude of the God of Steam and Machinery Church, although Rosal was historically an enemy of the Luan Kingdom, he had a considerably high level of discussion within the Luan Kingdom itself. Some cursed him, some loved him, some worshipped him, and some disdained him. It can be said that discussing topics related to Rosal, to some extent, even counted as a daily routine for many people in Luan. And for Bernadette, she was both a worshipper of Rosal and a member who hated him. She loved him, hated him, had fiercely cursed him to his face, yet had also once innocently tugged at Rosal's coattails in front of a swing, looking up at him earnestly to tell him how much she admired him. She was Bernadette, and also a Gustave. She was Rosal's proud eldest daughter, and also the most fervent opponent of Emperor Caesar. However, time had passed, and Rosal had fallen for over 100 years. Bernadette had lost a father who was a tyrant, and also lost a family member who loved her. Perhaps people always regret after losing, or perhaps time had settled those loves and hates, brewing them into a bitter wine. After losing her father, Bernadette finally, as if waking from a dream, began to frantically miss Rosal. She still loved him and still hated him, but none of this prevented Bernadette from searching for Rosal. Father, why? Bernadette murmured silently. She still couldn't accept Rosal's actions in his later years. She had a gut feeling that there might be something wrong, but the lack of information prevented her from confirming what was wrong. Bernadette couldn't even be sure that her father was still alive or could be resurrected, she just refused to give up searching, like an obsession. This obsession had supported her search for over 100 years, it was no longer something she could simply give up. However, Bernadette did not come to Backland specifically to visit the Rosal Memorial Exhibition this time. The main reason she appeared in Backland at this time was that the ability of a seer had given her a hint. Something big might happen in Backland in the coming period, and it might contain the opportunity for her to advance to Sequence 2. Bernadette had been at the Sequence 3 level for a long time. She had already completely digested the seer potion and had also prepared all the materials needed to concoct the Sequence 2 sage potion. The main reason she hadn't advanced was that she had been stuck by the advancement ritual. The sage's advancement ritual required Bernadette to prevent a disaster involving high-level power. This sounds simple, but please note that high level here refers to the Sequence 0 level. In the 5th epoch, deities were not manifest. Although various secret organizations that worshipped evil gods were still causing trouble, those truly involving divine descent were too few. Even if they occurred, they would be extremely secretive before they happened. Bernadette found it too difficult to find a disaster that met the ritual conditions, so she had been delaying until today. Chapter 217 Fist of True Love. I hope I can successfully complete the ritual this time, Bernadette sighed in her heart, her peripheral vision inadvertently catching a glimpse of a figure. She casually looked away, but then suddenly froze. Wait, that person just now. Bernadette abruptly looked in the direction where she had just glimpsed the figure, but she didn't see any familiar presence. Did I see wrong? But Bernadette frowned slightly. Although it was just a fleeting glance, she was certain that the silhouette she had just seen strongly resembled someone. Her father, Rosal. This sudden event made Bernadette stand up, her gaze scrutinizing the nearby Kingdom Museum. She wasn't sure what she had just seen, or if it was just a similar figure, or the product of some illusion, or perhaps a trap. Bernadette knew very well that as one of the people who inherited the most of Rosal's legacy, there were many in this world who coveted what she held. Even the Church of Steam and Machinery, although there was a certain tacit understanding between them due to Rosal's relationship with Bonneva, it couldn't be guaranteed that they wouldn't harbor intentions against her. But after a moment of contemplation, Bernadette still went to the Kingdom Museum, entering it with the crowd. The leading guide was vividly explaining Rosal's life. For Bernadette, Rosal's own daughter, this was naturally nothing new. After all, Bernadette knew more about the inside story of what the guide was saying than the guide herself. She had even personally experienced many of those events. Bernadette merely scanned the surrounding crowd, searching for the figure she had just glimpsed. Suddenly, Bernadette's gaze paused. This time, she saw the figure, and it was much clearer than the previous fleeting glimpse. She saw a back that wasn't necessarily familiar, the owner of which was standing in front of a display case. Due to the angle, Bernadette couldn't see the person's face, but just the back perfectly matched her father in her memory. Is it an illusion? Is it a trap? Or, have you finally returned, father? At this moment, Bernadette was even a little timid. She wanted to walk quickly forward to call out to the person, to see who the owner of this back truly was, but when she actually took a step, Bernadette felt as if her feet weighed 1,000 pounds. Bernadette knew she was afraid that this was just a phantom, a lie. However, just as Bernadette hesitated, the owner of the back walked towards the corner and instantly disappeared from Bernadette's sight. Bernadette froze for a moment. This time, she didn't hesitate anymore and quickly chased after the person, but when she reached the corner and looked again, she still couldn't find that back. Bernadette felt an immense sense of loss in an instant. She bit her lower lip, finally suppressing the surging emotions in her heart, and began to rationally analyze the possibility of this back being Rosal. Frankly speaking, this possibility was very low. After all, if it really were her father, why would he hide from her like this? But Bernadette had an intuition, and that intuition told her, yes, it was him. The tug of war between rationality and emotion made Bernadette bite her lower lip again. She suddenly thought of something and returned to the display case where the back had been staying. She suddenly froze, because a sticky note had been attached to the display case at some point. Bernadette tore off the sticky note and saw an incredibly familiar handwriting. The sticky note read, Although Rosal's designs are good, the little princess deserves something better. Don't let the past trap you. In an instant, all the struggle disappeared. Bernadette covered her mouth with her hand, her vision blurring at that moment. Of course, she recognized this handwriting, her father's handwriting. Bernadette looked down at her clothes. They were not the popular styles of today, but a trend that Rosal had started many years ago. Bernadette was not stubbornly unwilling to accept the trends of the new era. She just felt that by wearing these familiar clothes, she could somehow get a little closer to that past era. In that era, Rosal had not yet fallen, had not become a tyrant. She was still the carefree eldest daughter of Rosal, and her biggest daily worry was how to avoid the hidden sage's cramming education. Bernadette suddenly ran towards the corner. She looked around, searching for a familiar shadow in the crowd. But, no, there was nothing anywhere. Bernadette almost ran through the entire Rosal Memorial exhibition, but she never saw that familiar appearance again. Just as Bernadette was despairing, the wind carried a sticky note to Bernadette. Bernadette grabbed the sticky note without any hesitation and saw a line of words written on it. "Look behind you." Bernadette turned around almost immediately, then froze, because she found that her surroundings had changed at some point. The people who were visiting the Rosal Memorial exhibition had all disappeared, and the place she was in was clearly no longer inside the Kingdom Museum. But none of that mattered. What was important was that a magnificent coffin had appeared behind her at some point, and a sign was stuck next to the coffin. Bernadette's gaze went to the sign, and her expression immediately became strange, because the sign read this line of words. "Rosal is here. Please awaken him with a fist of true love." A fist of true love. For a moment, Bernadette didn't know if this was a cruel joke. Of course, she had heard Rosal tell the story of the true love's kiss, where Sleeping Beauty, cursed by a witch, could only be awakened by a true love's kiss. But what in the world was a fist of true love? Bernadette looked down at her hand. It was long and strong, clearly capable of delivering a very painful blow. Bernadette then looked up at the coffin again. Although she thought it might be a cruel prank, Bernadette still approached the coffin and gently pushed her hand on it, discovering that the coffin even had a sliding lid. Bernadette looked inside the coffin, and her breath immediately hitched, because she did indeed see a familiar person. This time, it was no longer a fleeting glimpse, nor just a back. Rosal Gustav, her father, was truly lying in this coffin, even wearing a complete set of very elaborate formal attire. Bernadette raised her hand, her fingertips trembling slightly as they landed on Rosal's neck. There was no warmth, no pulse. The Rosal before her was like a highly realistic dummy, or a corpse whose time had been stopped. He just lay there quietly, without a trace of living breath. Chapter 218 How Russell Got Beaten. This connection instinctively made Bernadette uncomfortable. Just then, the corner of her eye caught sight of something in the coffin. It seemed to be a stack of papers. Bernadette paused, then reached out to take the stack of papers. On the top sheet of white paper, it read, "What are you still hesitating for? Aren't you going to give Rosal a punch of true love to awaken him?" Unlike the previous note, Bernadette didn't recognize the handwriting on the white paper. It clearly didn't belong to Rosal but to someone else. Is this really not a joke? Because the content was so outlandish, even seeing the sentence for the second time, Bernadette still hesitated. She then looked at the next page of the white paper, which read, "All right, as a lady, it's indeed wrong to just hit people with your fist, but it's okay, I can give you a reason to hit him." A reason? Curiosity arose in Bernadette's heart. She continued to look further and saw familiar square characters. It was the mysterious script her father used when writing his diary, only this time, beneath the square characters, there was also a line in Loan's common language. Is this a translation? Bernadette wasn't quite sure. She almost instinctively focused her attention on the content that seemed to be a translation of Rosal's diary, and then she paused. The white paper read, "March 17th, are all the ladies of Intis so open? Did I get her, or did she get me? Always feels a bit strange." Bernadette realized almost immediately that this was Rosal's romantic history. She was not a naive young girl and naturally knew her father had a chaotic private life. However, knowing was one thing, but Bernadette had never seen it with her own eyes. Rosal still cared about his reputation. Although he was wild outside, he had always been very proper in front of his daughter. So, even though Bernadette had long heard rumors about Rosal's reputation in certain aspects, she was still shocked at this moment. Her father actually wrote such things in his diary. Bernadette almost subconsciously bit her lower lip, her gaze fixed as she continued to look down, and sure enough, she saw more romantic history. This included not only records of her father's dalliances with a certain lady or young woman, but even records of her father dating a certain lady while her mother was pregnant. As she read, Bernadette felt her fists clench. She looked at Rosal, who lay like a corpse, and couldn't help but let out a cold laugh. If Rosal's diary was full of these things, what did her years of trying to decipher Rosal's diary even amount to? A clown. If Bernadette had hated Rosal before because he wasn't acting human, out of a sense of justice, then now Bernadette wanted to beat Rosal purely out of personal vendetta. But Bernadette still restrained herself. She looked through the remaining white papers one by one and quickly came to the last one, which read, "What are you still hesitating for?" Yes, what was she still hesitating for? Bernadette finally stopped holding back. She looked down at her long, strong palm, clenched her fist tightly, and slammed it hard into Rosal's handsome face. Ouch, ouch, ouch. Rosal almost screeched as he sat up from the coffin. He dramatically covered his bruised face with his hand, then looked at Bernadette with a slightly flustered yet excited smile, and couldn't help but exclaim, "Bernadette." "Father." Bernadette looked up at him. It was clear that Bernadette was also very excited at the moment, but she didn't rush into a friendly father-daughter reunion interaction with Rosal. Instead, she presented the stack of papers filled with Rosal's diary and its translations in front of Rosal, and said faintly, "Are these diary translations correct?" This. Rosal immediately felt cold sweat trickle down, and he couldn't help but curse inwardly. If you ask why Rosal was lying in the coffin, waiting for Bernadette's punch of true love to awaken him, the reason is simple. Roland told him that Bernadette's love and resentment towards him were both very deep. So, for the sake of their father-daughter relationship, it would be best to have a special reunion, to resolve Bernadette's resentment towards him as much as possible. Rosal believed this, or rather, he had no choice but to believe it. Roland clearly had an attitude that if he didn't agree, he wouldn't arrange their father-daughter reunion. Plus, Rosal indeed didn't want those past events to hinder his relationship with Bernadette, so he could only grit his teeth and agree. This led to the previous scene. Not directly recognizing each other and doing a back shot reveal was to give Bernadette ample time to prepare, and also to build her psychological anticipation to the fullest. The punch of true love was about breaking before building, allowing Bernadette to vent her resentment towards her father, lest keeping it bottled up cause problems. As for Rosal's diary, Roland stated that in the future, transmigrators would be everywhere, and his diary would no longer be a secret anyway. Since death was inevitable sooner or later, why not take this opportunity to expose it all at once? At most, he'd get 2 more beatings. It was better to get this over with while the father-daughter reunion atmosphere was at its best, rather than having a family war erupt later. Putting everything else aside, Roland's arrangements were indeed very reasonable, at least they sounded very feasible, which was one of the reasons Rosal was willing to follow his instructions. However, even though he had been mentally prepared, facing Bernadette's furious eyes at this moment, Rosal instinctively flinched and said with an awkward smile, "The diary translations are correct, but Bernadette, listen to my explanation." "There's nothing to explain," Bernadette interrupted Rosal. She looked expressionlessly at the father she had searched for over 100 years, and said almost through gritted teeth, "Father. You truly are my good father." She finished with a laugh, which sounded like a cold sneer or perhaps expressed disappointment and weariness. Bernadette then turned, seemingly ready to leave this sorrowful place. Every single piece of content was seen one by one. "Wait, Bernadette." Rosal became anxious when she started to leave, and quickly reached out to grab Bernadette, saying, "I know you're angry. I truly was a scoundrel back then, and I did many things that wronged your mother. I am very sorry for that. Hit me. Do it for your mother." Bernadette's steps halted. Listening to Rosal's words, which were sincere but not entirely so, her emotions were complex, and she felt her fist clench again. "Father, you're right, I really should hit you, for mother's sake." Bernadette took a deep breath and murmured. She clenched her fist and looked at Rosal, and the atmosphere instantly became one of a father's demise and a son's laughter. "Oh, Are you cosplaying a panda? A few minutes later, Roland whistled, looking at Rosal with a pair of panda eyes, and teased him. How can you even say that? Rosal glared at him irritably, then cautiously looked at Bernadette, who seemed to have calmed down, acting like a doting father. What do I have to be ashamed of? You getting beaten is entirely your own doing. If you had just restrained yourself a little, you wouldn't have gotten this beating. Roland said with a smile. He unhurriedly picked up his teacup and took a sip of red tea, then glanced at Bernadette beside him, and said leisurely, or are you very unhappy with the verdict your little princess gave you? Chapter 219 The future of humanity is in Catlia's hands. Rosal immediately broke out in a cold sweat again. He looked at Bernadette and saw her give a perfect fake smile, his heart instantly leaping to his throat. He immediately said, I have no objections to this. It's all my own fault. I was too depraved in the past. I swear I will never be like this again, and I will absolutely turn over a new leaf and become a new person. Bernadette glanced at Rosal, not commenting on her father's statement. She then looked at Roland, her expression a little reserved, and said, Hello, Your Highness Lucifer. Father has already told me about you. I'm truly grateful for your help to Dad. If it weren't for you, I might never have seen my father again. It was clear that while Bernadette had strong opinions about Rosal's scoundrel nature, she genuinely cared for her father, and her gratitude towards Roland was completely heartfelt. Roland quietly listened to Bernadette's words of thanks, picked up his teacup, took a sip, and then smiled. It's just a transaction. I need your father's power, and your father needs my help. It's very fair. Even so, you are still my benefactor, Bernadette said seriously. She, of course, knew about the transaction between Roland and her father, but that didn't stop her from being grateful to Roland. Roland smiled when he heard this, and suddenly said, If you're really that grateful to me, I actually have something I need your help with. What help? Before Bernadette could speak, Rosal, who was beside her, became wary. He scrutinized Roland up and down, as if examining a pig coveting his own little cabbage, and suspiciously asked, Bernadette is only sequence 3. What can she help you with? Is there anything I can't do? Roland naturally saw what Rosal was thinking. He couldn't help but roll his eyes, then chuckled, You really can't do this one. Please tell me, as long as it's something I can do, I will do my best to help, Bernadette said, stopping Rosal, who still wanted to say something. Don't worry, it's nothing major. I just need to ask you to contact someone, Roland said, not keeping them in suspense, and smiled. There's a crew member named Frank on Catlia's future. I need you to help me contact him. Frank. Bernadette was stunned for a moment. She then carefully recalled Catlia's crew members and found that there really seemed to be such a person among them, apparently a Sequence 6 biologist, and also the first mate of the future. May I presume to ask, is there something you need with this crew member named Frank? Bernadette asked after a moment of hesitation. She remembered that Catlia generally valued most of the crew members on the future, so Bernadette still wanted to clarify this matter. It's not a bad thing. I've recently been looking for talented scientific researchers to study the mysteries of the human body and overcome various medical problems. Frank is a genius in the field of biology, so I want to invite him to work in my laboratory. Roland said with a smile. Although his laboratory was still a long way off, Roland felt that it wasn't a big problem. As long as the people were in place, backed by the Aurora Order and the Earth Mother Church, would he still be afraid of not getting the relevant equipment? Once the people and materials were in place, establishing a laboratory would be a matter of minutes. Bernadette was stunned for a moment, probably not expecting such a result. She hesitated and nodded. Okay, I will notify Catlia and give you a reply as soon as possible. Wait, who is this Catlia? Rosal, who was listening in, finally couldn't help but ask. Ah, didn't I tell you? Catlia is Bernadette's daughter. Roland blinked, speaking before Bernadette. Bernadette froze for a moment, pursed her lips, and initially wanted to refute, but after thinking about it, she said nothing. Because Bernadette also didn't know how to define Catlia, saying she was her daughter seemed to be no problem. Rosal had been expecting to hear Bernadette's refutation, and seeing her acquiescent attitude, he suddenly felt like the sky had fallen. He looked at Roland and then at Bernadette, hesitated for a long time, and then gritted his teeth and asked, Who is the child's father? Rosal's expression almost directly wrote on his face. I want to see which scoundrel snatched my little cabbage." Bernadette was stunned again when she heard this, then reacted, feeling a little amused and exasperated. "PFF'd." Roland burst out laughing directly. He didn't keep them in suspense either, and said with a smile, "Ah, I almost forgot to say, Katlia is an adopted daughter." Rosal was stunned for a moment, then almost subconsciously breathed a sigh of relief. "An adopted daughter, then it's fine. Dad." Bernadette couldn't help but call out to Rosal with a hint of dissatisfaction. She looked at her old father, and after thinking for a moment, said, "I've already grown up." The unspoken meaning was that even if she really got married, it would be normal. Although Bernadette currently had no thoughts of dating or marriage, she was also a bit speechless at her old father's attitude of guarding against potential sons-in-law as if they were wolves. Ahem, isn't this just a common state of an old father? Rosal coughed a little uncomfortably, glanced at Bernadette, and said with a touch of melancholy, "Bernadette, you have indeed grown up." But Rosal suddenly changed the subject, emphasizing, "Dad isn't against you falling in love, it's just that there are too many scumbags in this world, so, Bernadette, if you really fall for someone, you must let Dad check them out for you." Rosal wasn't unable to accept Bernadette dating or getting married, but he was truly afraid that one day Bernadette would meet a scumbag like him, or that some punk would appear and say to him, "Old man, my ghost bike is parked outside your house, hope it doesn't get stolen." If that happened, Rosal would truly faint from anger. "Dad, my taste isn't that bad." Bernadette almost rolled her eyes, feeling that her father's worry was unfounded. For Katlia, this was just another ordinary day. She routinely inspected the entire future, making sure that the bunch of problem children on the future hadn't caused any trouble, then returned to her room and was about to read when she suddenly felt a gentle breeze pass by. Katlia immediately became alert, realizing something and looking at the desk. Sure enough, she saw a letter on the desk. A letter from the mysterious Queen Bernadette. Katlia immediately tore open the envelope and read the letter, wanting to see what instructions Bernadette had for her. But this time, Katlia's brows furrowed more and more as she read, her expression at the end confused and hesitant. "Queen, why?" Chapter 220, Russell is very glad. Queen, why? Katlia was genuinely confused and hesitant at this moment. Because in this letter from the mysterious Queen Bernadette, a mysterious and powerful existence was mentioned, specifically asking to meet Frank, and it seemed the other party planned to invite Frank to join a certain laboratory. But that was Frank. Frank, who wanted to crossbreed wheat and cows, grew mushrooms that produced milk, and turned fish blood into red wine. Katlia couldn't even imagine what Frank, with his madness and practical ability, could create if he received funding from a major figure. However, Katlia quickly realized that although as the captain of the future, she was perfectly clear about how crazy her first mate was, the mysterious Queen Bernadette obviously didn't know. Should I write a letter to remind the Queen? Katlia hesitated, then thought of something and murmured, "No, even if the Queen doesn't know, that mysterious existence must have some understanding of Frank's situation, otherwise they wouldn't want to invite him to join the laboratory." Laboratory, Katlia frowned. Even though she had always admired and trusted Bernadette immensely, at this moment Katlia still felt worried. What kind of laboratory would invite Frank to join? Katlia couldn't help but look in the direction where Frank usually lived. If there were no surprises, Frank should be doing his experiment to make wheat taste like beef, right? Actually, I don't need to worry too much. After all, Frank is just a sequence 6. No matter how crazy he is, he can't really destroy the world, right, haha. Katlia ended with a dry laugh. What was clearly self-consolation became less and less confident as she spoke. In the unseen, Katlia even had a strange feeling, as if the future of humanity was in her hands at this moment, and would lead to different outcomes depending on the decision she made. No, what am I thinking? How is that possible? Katlia shook her head, suppressing the wild thoughts in her mind. Then she folded the letter and put it away, preparing to go find Frank. Even with thousands of doubts in her heart, this was, after all, the Queen's instruction, so no matter how hesitant, Katlia would comply. Katlia arrived at a rather opportune time. Just as she reached the door of Frank's room, she saw Frank, covered in mud stains, walk out of the room, holding a stalk of wheat in his hand, muttering something under his breath. Frank, seeing that he hadn't noticed her arrival at all, Katlia couldn't help but call out. "Captain, is something wrong?" Frank finally noticed Katlia, and immediately showed a happy smile, asking. Indeed, something is, the arrow was on the string and had to be loosed, so Katlia didn't beat around the bush and told him everything in detail. "Really, Captain, I'd like to talk to that existence." Frank's eyes lit up after hearing Katlia's words, and he answered without any hesitation. This was not surprising, as Frank had always been ostracized by others because of his eccentric ideas. Even as a loyal believer of the Earth Mother, he had been expelled from the Earth Mother Church. Although Frank himself never believed what he did was wrong, he was inevitably disappointed that no one recognized him. Now, hearing that someone actually appreciated him, he was naturally more excited than anyone. "Since you agree, I'll write back to the Queen now." Katlia looked at Frank, whose excitement was hard to hide, wanting to speak but stopping, then wanting to speak again. She had intended to give him some advice, but in the end, said nothing. She also knew how much Frank had always wanted to be recognized by others. Now that someone who appreciated Frank had finally appeared, it was clearly a good thing for him too. The only problem was probably. Katlia subconsciously bit her lower lip, and her previous worries resurfaced. Would she truly not become a sinner of this world? Bernadette was naturally unaware of Katlia's worries. At this moment, she was accompanying Rosal on an exhibition tour. That's right, they were touring the Rosal Memorial Exhibition. Just a moment ago, Bernadette, adhering to her decisive principle, had finished writing the letter to Katlia and immediately had a messenger send it to her. Then, after the three of them sat idly in the different space for half a minute, Roland suggested that since they were already there, they might as well tour the Rosal Memorial Exhibition together. Bernadette naturally had no objection to this. She had originally come to tour the Rosal Memorial Exhibition today to reminisce about the past. Although she had just run through the entire Kingdom Museum, it couldn't really be called. Chapter 221. Luo Lin's human shell has become more stable. Bernadette's expression was also a little amused. It wasn't her first time attending a Rosal-related memorial exhibition, so she wasn't surprised by the display of a toilet. However, perhaps because Rosal, the person involved, was right there, Bernadette felt a strange sensation in her heart as she looked at the flush toilet. But, seeing Rosal clearly a bit annoyed and embarrassed by the flush toilet in front of him, Bernadette's mood couldn't help but improve a little. She murmured, just like before. What? Although Bernadette's voice was very soft, Rosal had been paying attention to his beloved daughter and naturally heard her words. He immediately asked, "What's like before?" "I mean, father feels just like he did a long time ago." Bernadette paused, and although she hadn't expected Rosal to hear her, she didn't hide anything and said frankly. "Father, ever since, after that, I've never seen such human emotions on your face again." Rosal fell silent for a second upon hearing this. He sighed, then suddenly raised his hand and rubbed Bernadette's head, saying, "I'm sorry, Bernadette." "Father, you don't need to apologize to me, or rather." Bernadette paused here, but still looked at Rosal seriously and said, "The person you should apologize to isn't me." Rosal had truly raised Bernadette very well. Even though she deeply loved her father, Bernadette would still choose to confront the mistakes Rosal had made, and she wouldn't ignore their existence just because she was reunited with her father after so much difficulty. Rosal opened his mouth upon hearing this, then finally sighed dejectedly, closed his eyes, and said, "Those were indeed the sins I committed." Rosal would not deny the evil he had done, nor would he deny the outrageous things he had committed. Regardless of whether he was influenced by an outer god when he did those things, what was done, and what was wrong. Rosal was a scumbag, but at least he dared to take responsibility for his actions. Looking at Rosal like this, Bernadette pursed her lips, becoming even more certain of a certain conjecture in her heart. She couldn't help but ask, "Father, what exactly happened back then? Why did you suddenly become like that?" "Sorry, Bernadette, for your safety, I cannot tell you these things." Rosal shook his head. Information related to outer gods would pollute beings below the angel level just by being known. Rosal would absolutely not risk Bernadette. "Don't make it difficult for your father. As a seer, you should be aware that there is knowledge in this world that brings danger just by knowing it." Roland also spoke at this moment. He looked at Bernadette and smiled, saying, "If you really want to know the truth, then work hard to advance to a sage." Bernadette's eyes moved. She clearly thought of something, bit her lower lip, and finally looked at Rosal and said, "So, Father, the reason you were so depraved and insane in your later years was indeed due to the influence of some power, right?" Bernadette wasn't stupid. Even without knowing about outer gods, the currently known information was enough for her to guess. Or rather, Bernadette's inner self actually yearned for this outcome. She was also a person with selfish motives. Although she wouldn't deny the sins Rosal had committed, Bernadette was clearly more willing to believe that Rosal's actions in his later years were influenced by other forces, rather than admitting that Rosal was just a big jerk. This was human nature, where selfishness and public interest intertwined, making it extremely complex. Rosal heard this, his lips twitched, and he did not deny it. In his heart, Rosal naturally hoped his daughter would have a better impression of him. Even though Rosal was very clear that even excluding the influence of outer gods, he was essentially a jerk. Roland quietly observed this scene, clicking his tongue in his heart, finding it amusing. Bernadette, whose moral compass could be considered very upright, would subconsciously seek excuses for her father's evil, while Rosal, who once treated the world as a game and could be called a scumbag in various aspects, still hoped to maintain a somewhat positive image in front of his daughter. Their good and evil were real, and their selfish motives were also real. Human nature, as expected, was a very interesting thing. Roland felt he had learned something new, and even the human shell he inhabited became a bit more stable. It seems he accidentally thought of something incredible, haha. Roland blinked, just about to say something to break the atmosphere, when his peripheral vision suddenly caught sight of something. The person Roland happened to glimpse also looked in Roland's direction at that moment, and was immediately stunned. Klein hadn't expected to meet an acquaintance just by visiting a Rosal Memorial exhibition. Of course, considering Mr. Lucifer's special attitude towards transmigrators, Klein wasn't surprised to encounter him at the Rosal Memorial exhibition. The only thing that made him hesitate was that Klein found the person next to Mr. Lucifer seemed a little familiar. Every single one, without exception, was seen in one glance. Klein almost instinctively recalled the portraits of Emperor Rosal he had specifically sought out and looked at, comparing them further with the person next to Mr. Lucifer, finally confirming a fact: although disguised, the other party was most likely Emperor Rosal himself. Of course, considering Mr. Lucifer's special ability, this was more likely to be the past Emperor Rosal, summoned forth. So, should he go over and say hello? Klein was a little hesitant, and also a little eager. After all, he had been following the serialization of Rosel's diary ever since his transmigration, and he was very curious about this transmigrator senior who could be called awesome. But Klein was also worried that Mr. Lucifer wouldn't welcome him, so for a moment, he was unsure whether to go over and say hello. Just as Klein was hesitating, little Amon, who had come out with Klein to visit the exhibition, had no such reservations. He also saw Lucifer and ran towards him without any hesitation. "Uncle Lucifer, good morning." "Good morning, little Amon, are you visiting the exhibition with Klein?" Roland half bent down to catch little Amon, who was rushing towards him, then reached out and rubbed little Amon's fluffy head. He then looked up at Klein and smiled, saying, "Are you in charge of little Amon today?" "Yes, Medici seems to be busy, so it's my turn to take care of little Amon today." Klein, who had followed after little Amon rushed over, nodded upon hearing this and said, "I happen to have a few tickets to the Rosal Memorial exhibition. Considering that little Amon should learn some modern history, I brought him over." Roland wasn't surprised by this. He naturally knew what Medici was busy with. As a hands-off manager, after reading the vampire clan's information and confirming that there were no talents he wanted, he lost most of his interest in them and directly handed over the backland vampires to Medici to manage. Anyway, the current task of these vampires was to serve as battlefield medics. As for the laboratory matters, they could just transfer people in once the laboratory was established later. Chapter 222: Klein's first meeting with Rosel. And this is. Rosal naturally saw Klein and the little Amon. Seeing how close they were to Roland, he immediately became interested and asked curiously. "This is little Amon. If you know about the Marauder pathway, you should know who he is." As for this one, Roland paused here, his gaze falling on Klein, and he said with a smile. Sherlock Moriarty, my student. You should be able to guess where he comes from. Amon. Hiss, is that real or fake? The Amon I know isn't so pure. Hearing Roland's introduction, Rosal's gaze first fell on the little Amon. Looking at this little fellow who was a few years old, he momentarily suspected Roland was deceiving him. Amon wanted to experience an ordinary person's life, so he specifically threw a clone to me, sealing his memory and mind. So you can indeed treat this little Amon as a child now, Roland explained with a smile. Huh, experience an ordinary person's life. Is he full and bored? Rosal was a bit puzzled. His gaze fell on Roland, and he clearly thought of something else, asking suspiciously, you didn't force him, did you? Although the time they spent together wasn't long, Rosal had some understanding of Roland's mischievousness, so it was natural for him to make such a guess. I just gave a suggestion. It was Amon himself who wanted to gain humanity, Roland said with a smile. Hearing this, Rosal knew that it was true. Amon was definitely tormented by Mr. Lucifer to the point where he had to sell off a clone to protect his main body. For a moment, a bit of pity couldn't help but rise in his heart. Poor little Amon. However, this pity lasted for less than a second. Rosal's attention immediately fell on Klein, and he said with great interest, Sherlock Moriarty. That's a pretty good name. It can rival my Caesar. After commenting on Klein's pseudonym, Rosal smiled and extended his hand to Klein, saying, Rosal Gustav, you should have heard this name. After a pause, Rosal suddenly switched to Chinese and said, do you mind telling me your real name? First, let me introduce myself. My surname is Huang and my given name is Dao. If you've read my diaries, you probably know this name. Klein was also in a daze when he heard the familiar Chinese, then he couldn't help but smile and replied in Chinese, my name is Zhou Mingrui. After transmigrating, I'm called Klein Moretti, and now I'm operating under the identity of Sherlock Moriarty. Oh, a master of aliases. Your path, according to the usual tropes, will definitely require a few more aliases later, Rosal raised an eyebrow and teased. The relationship between the two transmigrators, who were strangers in a foreign land, instantly became much closer. Rosal then remembered something else. He looked at Klein hesitantly, and finally spoke, your sequence shouldn't be very high right now, should it? Although the sequences in the world of the Lord of Mysteries are not like those in cultivation novels where higher-level beings can directly see through lower-level ones, Rosal was, after all, a Sequence 1 knowledge emperor, so he could still roughly judge the sequence of the person in front of him. I just advanced to Sequence 7 not long ago, Klein did not hide it. After all, facing a fellow countryman who was at least an angel, there was no need for a mid-sequence like him to conceal his strength. How long have you been transmigrated? Rosal showed no surprise and immediately asked. Less than 4 months, Klein did not hide it and replied. Hiss, I was just about to say, brother, your advancement is a bit slow. Now it seems I've wronged you. Advancing to Sequence 7 in just over 3 months is even faster than I was back then. Rosal expressed his feelings about the cheat, looked at Klein a few times, and couldn't help but say, it's just too late, what a pity. As the Knowledge Emperor, Rosal could naturally see the specialness about Klein. He was not surprised by this, but when he thought of the impending apocalypse in just over a decade, he couldn't help but shake his head. After all, before seeing it with their own eyes, no one would believe that someone could become a god in 3 years and an old one on the same day. Even fairy tales wouldn't dare to write it like that. Hearing Rosal's words, Klein naturally understood what he meant. He touched his nose and offered no comment. You transmigrated early, but what good did it do? You still took the wrong pathway. Roland, who had been quietly eating melon, spoke at this moment. I just didn't think of it, sigh. But it's also fortunate that I didn't take the right pathway, otherwise that thing might have fallen into my hands, Rosal instinctively retorted first, then thought of something else and said with some lingering fear. However, out of consideration for Klein, who was only mid-sequence, Rosal naturally blurred out words related to outer deities and old ones. He then looked at Roland and said, no wonder you wanted to save Mr. Dorr. Otherwise, this matter would have been really difficult to handle. Although there was another Amon besides Mr. Dorr as a candidate for Lord of the Mysteries, everyone understood Amon, the god of trickery. Although Rosal hadn't dealt with Amon much, He knew what kind of fellow he was. He had Zeratul and Mr. Door by his side, so how could he not be familiar with Amon? You guessed wrong there. Even without Mr. Door, Klein could become the celestial worthy. Roland glanced at him and replied with a smile. In the original destiny, 3 years later he would be the genuine fool, and then in just half a day, he would be half a celestial worthy. Rosal's expression froze. After a second of stunned silence, he looked at Roland, then at Klein, and finally said, Dude, I originally thought I was the genuine, dragon-slaying protagonist, template, but I didn't expect there to be a master. Where did you buy this cheat? The last sentence was naturally a jest. Klein smiled helplessly at the words, and after thinking for a moment, said, Probably a gift from God. Ha ha ha, I like people with your sense of humor. Rosal laughed and patted Klein's shoulder, then realized something and looked at Klein, saying, Wait, you know. He does know. Except for the knowledge that comes with contamination, I have told him everything else, Roland said indifferently. Mr. Lucifer did tell me about my destiny, Klein nodded. He looked at Roland, his expression undisguised gratitude. He gave me the chance to choose my own destiny. Rosal wasn't stupid. Hearing this, he roughly guessed what was going on. He glanced at Klein, sighed, and said, It seems you haven't had it easy either, little Joe. Alas, we are all pitiful people who have been messed up by destiny. Sometimes I don't know whether transmigrating back then was a good thing or a bad thing. Of course, as someone who survived, what I'm saying sounds pretty pretentious. At this point, Rosal gave a self-deprecating laugh, with a hint of bitterness in his smile. Klein remained silent, only sighing similarly. Chapter 223 The God of Poverty. Seeing the atmosphere turn heavy, Roland reached out and clapped his hands loudly, then smiled and said, All right, if you know the topic is heavy, then don't talk about it. Don't end up with both of you crying. Let's talk about something happy instead. Like what? Rosal looked at him. Like how the taste of a witch is really good. Roland said with a smile, looking at Rosal. I've actually always been curious, even if you didn't know at first, but later when you knew the truth of the transmigration, you should have understood that your diary would one day fall into the hands of a fellow transmigrator. So how did you dare to write about these love affairs? Are you really not afraid that one day they will be made public by a fellow transmigrator, leading to your complete social death? Ah. Rosal was drenched in sweat. He stammered for a long time, then finally sighed and said, When I first wrote these diaries, I never expected to meet a fellow transmigrator. Later, when I learned the truth of the transmigration, I didn't have many sober moments left, so how could I remember to destroy these diaries? And back then, I thought, since they are fellow transmigrators and have benefited from my diary, they shouldn't do something ungrateful like publicizing my diary, right? So, who's naive after all? Roland glanced at Rosal. Rosal immediately remembered that when he first met Mr. Lucifer, he had indeed advised this fellow transmigrator not to trust other transmigrators too much. He then chuckled and said, That's because I was still young back then. Klein, however, thought of something and looked at Roland with a strange expression. Because he remembered very clearly that not only Emperor Rosal's diaries were circulating in the world, but Mr. Lucifer's diaries were also quite numerous. Why are you looking at me? My diaries don't have parts that would cause social death. I'm very happy for people to appreciate my stories. Roland naturally noticed Klein's strange gaze. He immediately looked at the other party and said with a smile. Klein immediately lowered his head a little awkwardly, rubbing his nose with a wry smile. Wait, what do you mean by your diary? Rosal looked at the two suspiciously. Klein was already embarrassed, so he naturally wouldn't answer Rosal's question. Roland, however, looked at Rosal fearlessly and said, I wrote some diaries and spread them out. Good heavens, are you that brave? Rosal immediately looked at Roland with the eyes of a warrior. Can't compare to you, who dares to write anything? Roland said with a smile. Rosal was speechless for a moment again. Father, what language are you two speaking? Bernadette, who had been listening for a long time and hadn't understood a single word, finally couldn't help but ask. Ahem, this is Father's hometown language. When Father gets better, I'll teach it to you. Rosal coughed and switched to Loan's common language, saying. He truly intended to teach Bernadette Chinese. He didn't teach her before because he didn't want Bernadette to know about the truth of the transmigration in the diary. But now, seeing that the future publication of the diary's content had become a fact, Rosal, adhering to the principle of no breaking, no building, simply decided that once the pollution issue was resolved and he could move freely, he would teach Bernadette Chinese. Bernadette's eyes instantly lit up when she heard this. She had long been curious about the unique language Rosal used, but Rosal had never shown any intention of teaching her this language. Now that Rosal might finally be willing to teach her, Bernadette was naturally happy. The reunion of fellow transmigrators naturally ended here. Adhering to the principle as since we've met, Roland and his two companions naturally joined forces with Klein and the two Amons, and began to tour the Rosal Memorial Exhibition together. Thus, the group walked to the library area, where most of the exhibited items were books Rosal had read, as well as some of his own works. Rosal looked at these books, stroking his chin, apparently remembering something. He then lowered his voice and said to Klein next to him, "Little Joe, do you see that bookmark?" Klein was startled for a moment, looked in the direction Rosal indicated, and then saw a bookmark tucked inside a book. Klein's eyebrow twitched, and he suddenly remembered the Rosel's diary he had once read. That diary had once mentioned the whereabouts of a profane cards. As a senior transmigrator, I have to give you, my junior, a meeting gift, but giving it directly would be boring. Rosal saw Klein's reaction and knew that Klein must have read the relevant diary. He immediately smiled and said, "I can clearly tell you that it is indeed a profane cards, and it is the one I left for the fated person. Now I give it to you, but whether you can get your hands on it depends on your ability, little Joe." Klein was stunned for a moment when he heard this, then thought of something and looked around nervously. "Don't worry, no one can hear our conversation. Otherwise, how could our chat in Chinese just now not attract the attention of others?" Rosal naturally knew what he was worried about and said with a smile. As the Knowledge Emperor, he naturally had a few tricks to make others not notice them. As Klein breathed a sigh of relief, he subconsciously looked at the bookmark again, his heart beating a little faster. After all, this was a profane cards said to contain a complete pathway. Not a single mistake, not a single omission, every single detail correct. Even if the pathway recorded in this profane cards was not the seer pathway, the potion formula could still be sold for money. Klein was truly impoverished now. Most of the money he earned daily went to repaying the debt of creeping hunger, and the remaining portion was all invested by Klein in bicycles. Now, he only had a grand total of £9.15. "Brother, tell me, what do you want to do after you get the profane cards?" Rosal could naturally see Klein's longing for the profane cards. He was somewhat proud of this and couldn't help but ask with a smile. "Sell it for money," Klein said without a second of hesitation. Rosal's smile froze on his face. Klein also realized that his expression was wrong and quickly explained, "I mean to sell the potion formula within the profane cards for money." It would have been better if he hadn't explained. As soon as he explained, Rosal's mouth twitched. The latter looked Klein up and down with a strange gaze and said, "Little Joe, that's a profane cards. It comes with anti-divination, and it records a pathway of a god. Can you only think of selling the potion formula within it for money?" "But I'm really short on money." Klein wasn't embarrassed, after all, he was genuinely poor. Forgive Klein, after all, he still owes thousands of pounds in foreign debt. Roland spoke at this moment, looking at Rosal with a smile, and said, "And honestly, what other use does your profane cards have besides its potion formula being able to be sold for money? It has many uses, for example." Rosal suddenly got stuck, because he realized that he couldn't think of what the profane cards could be used for at the moment. Chapter 224 Little Amon's Gift. "But that's not right," Rosal said, "this is clearly a very high-end item. He went to great lengths to create the profane cards." Rosal suddenly paused. He placed a hand on his forehead, seemingly with a headache, or perhaps remembering something, and murmured, "No, profane cards." Rosal suddenly looked up at Klein and Roland, his expression turning serious. He said, "There might be some issues with the profane cards. Don't collect all of them. Other paths are fine, but you must be careful with the mother card." Although Klein didn't know about the existence of outer gods, he roughly guessed what was going on. He was never a rebellious person, so he nodded at Rosal's warning and said, "I understand, Mr. Rosal." Roland was not surprised by this. He nodded and said, I know, don't worry. Even if there are really problems, I will handle them. Hearing Roland's words, Rosal was stunned for a moment, then showed a relieved expression and said with a smile, that's right, I forgot. We are afraid of him, but you are not. Just then, Klein suddenly felt someone pulling his clothes. He looked down and saw it was little Amon. He asked with a smile, what's wrong, little Amon? Is there something? Here. Little Amon directly stuffed something into his hand. Sherlock's thing, I brought it for you. Little Amon then looked up at Klein, speaking seriously, his expression like a cat that had done a good deed and was asking for praise. If little Amon had a tail, it would probably be wagging. Really? Thank you, Klein instinctively thanked him, but halfway through, he realized what little Amon was saying. He looked down at the bookmark in his hand, confirming that what little Amon had given him seemed to be the profane card disguised as a bookmark. Then Klein looked at little Amon again, unsure whether to feel touched or to admire little Amon's efficiency. He stole it too quickly. But no matter what his mood, it didn't stop Klein from smiling and rubbing little Amon's head, saying earnestly, thank you, little Amon. Sherlock is happy, and I am happy too. Little Amon immediately smiled happily. HMPH. Rosal naturally saw this scene and raised his eyebrows, seemingly ready to comment. But before he could speak, Roland interrupted him, saying, it seems that the disappearance of the bookmark has been discovered. Before the people from the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery surround this place, should we leave first? The Church of the God of Steam and Machinery undoubtedly attached great importance to matters related to Rosal, so within a few seconds after little Amon succeeded, someone had already discovered the anomaly. Members of the machinery hivemind, disguised, had already started to gather around. Go, 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 I don't want to deal with that steam guy right now. Rosal immediately nodded. Although as the Knowledge Emperor he would certainly not be afraid of this mid to low sequence official Beander, what if the God of Steam and Machinery noticed them if they actually started fighting? Rosal still had very complex feelings towards the God of Steam and Machinery, and now he didn't want to deal with the other party at all. Bernadette also clearly didn't want to deal with the people from the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery, and she also nodded. Since both of them decided to leave, Klein and little Amon, as the true parties involved, naturally wouldn't stay there. After all, one of them was a sequence 7 and the other a sequence 5. Staying there would make it very easy for the machinery hivemind to apprehend them on the spot. At that time, whether it was breaking out of prison themselves or notifying the Night Church to bail them out, neither would be very suitable. Roland was not surprised by this either. He smiled and glanced at the machinery hivemind members who were already approaching them, then raised his left hand and snapped his fingers with a snap. The next second, the figures of all members, including Rosal and Klein, disappeared together, evidently taken away by Roland using his travel ability. Wait. The machinery hivemind members lunged forward, but only caught empty air. Disappeared. Is it a traveler's ability? One of the machinery hivemind members guessed based on the information he had seen. Possibly. Another machinery hivemind member nodded, then suddenly paused and said, wait, do you still remember what those people looked like? Of course, huh? The machinery hivemind member was stunned, a confused expression on his face. I can't remember clearly. I only remember many mathematical formulas. Don't worry, little Joe. I'm a knowledge emperor after all. Although I can't compare to a spectator, I still have a small trick up my sleeve. Those machinery hivemind members won't remember what we look like. After leaving the Kingdom Museum, seeing Klein somewhat worried about the machinery hivemind coming to his door later, Rosal immediately waved his hand and comforted him. That's good. Thank you, Mr. Rosal. Klein immediately breathed a sigh of relief. Although he wasn't afraid if the Evernight goddess backed him up and the machinery hivemind really came to his door, it still felt awkward no matter how he thought about it. By the way, is this your home? It's quite simple. Rosal unreservedly surveyed the furnishings in the villa, as if remembering something, and said with a sigh, it reminds me of when I first transmigrated. I was really poor back then, I had to ask my parents for pocket money. You have 10 minutes left. Roland glanced at Rosal indifferently in response to his remarks, and said, ah, why is there only 10 minutes left? I haven't had a good parent-child interaction with Bernadette yet. Rosal immediately lost the mood to comment on the villa. He looked at Bernadette, wanting to say something, but at the last minute, he felt that nothing he could say seemed appropriate. Every mistake, every first, every single content, all in one go. Roland ignored him, skillfully brewed himself a cup of black tea, and then glanced at the second floor. In the study on the second floor, his alter ego, Jack Jones, was studying mysticism with Ask under Will's guidance. That's right, although Will was initially just little Amon's kindergarten teacher, because this snake of fate, who liked to pretend to be young, had truly lived too long, and unlike Ask who repeatedly lost his memory, or Medici who was trapped in the basement for many years and out of touch with the world, after Jack Jones, out of curiosity, asked him a few questions one time, Will gradually became the family's mysticism teacher. One can only say that having an elder at home is indeed like having a treasure. What's wrong, Teacher Will? Jack Jones, who was listening to Will narrate a certain period of history, noticed that Will, who was lecturing, suddenly stopped speaking. He immediately looked at him in confusion. How many people does Teacher know? Will asked with a strange expression. He naturally sensed Rosal and the others downstairs, which was why he stopped lecturing. Jack Jones blinked upon hearing this, and said innocently, there are too many, I can't even count them. Chapter 225, Russell's youngest son. Ask also seemed to sense something, and he smiled gently, saying, it seems we have guests. The three of them looked at each other and immediately decided to go downstairs to check the situation. By the time the three of them went downstairs, Rosal and Bernadette had already finished their conversation. It was clear that Rosal truly cared about Bernadette, as he instructed her on everything from daily necessities like clothing, food, housing, and transportation to various aspects of the mysteries field, especially emphasizing matters of romantic relationships. One could say that it was only because both of them were seer pathway beyonders, capable of efficient information exchange, that 10 minutes were enough for Rosal to finish his nagging. HMPH. Snake of Fate, Death Console, your little house is quite a hidden gem. After finishing his instructions to Bernadette, Rosal finally had the energy to pay attention to the people who had just come down from the second floor. He raised an eyebrow and teased. At the same time, Rosal also felt a sense of relief in his heart. He had originally been quite worried about whether he had gotten on a pirate ship, but now seeing so many people on the pirate ship with him, he felt much more at ease. The eyes of the people who came downstairs also fell on Rosal. Some had already recognized him, while others clearly had not, but this did not prevent them from greeting Rosal and Bernadette. Rosal and Bernadette then also smiled and greeted them, introducing themselves in passing. If you really think this is a pirate ship, I welcome you to disembark at any time, Roland said, glancing at Rosal with a sudden smile after they finished their pleasantries. He clearly saw what Rosal had been thinking earlier. Don't be like that, I don't think this is a pirate ship at all. Who said this is a pirate ship? This ship is excellent. Rosal was clearly an adult with a sufficiently thick skin. He immediately spoke, then paused, glanced at Roland again, rubbed his hands, and said, I was just thinking that this ship is so good, can my Bernadette also get a ride? Previously, Rosal had indeed been conflicted about whether to let Bernadette get on Lucifer's pirate ship, but now, looking at the lineup around Lucifer, he was no longer conflicted. The future Lord of the Mysteries candidates were almost all swept up by Lucifer. The Snake of Fate, symbolizing good luck, was also around him, and there was also a former Death Console. Coupled with the Creator faction cooperating with Lucifer, there was nothing to hesitate about. Seeing that Rosal and Roland were clearly discussing some serious matters, Ask and the other two simply started a quiet conversation with Klein, mainly asking about what had happened today. Roland ignored them, glanced at Rosal, and suddenly chuckled, saying, so you only care about Bernadette. Rosal was clearly a bit confused. Mr. Rosal, have you forgotten that you still have a young son alive in this world? Have you never thought about doing something for him? Roland said with a smile. Rosal finally reacted, but then fell into endless silence. After several seconds, he sighed and said, Bonava, I don't know how to face this child. I don't even know if he is still my child. Unlike Rosal's other children, Bonava was an angel personally appointed by the god of steam and machinery, and also the grace of the god of steam and machinery to Rosal, although Rosal himself deeply detested it. It was precisely because of this that Bonava's humanity was very faint, closer to a god than a human, which once caused Rosal great pain, not knowing whether the body beneath was his young son or an angel who had devoured his child. Father, Bernadette then spoke. She looked at Rosal and said seriously, just a few years ago, I saw Bonava once. He still kept the toys you gave him back then. I think, he is my brother. Although Bonava's humanity is very little now, he is still him. Bernadette's words made Rosal fall silent again. He sighed again, looked at Roland, and said with anticipation in his eyes, Boss, do you have a solution? The solution here naturally referred to a way for Bonava to regain his humanity. Bernadette also looked at Roland with expectant eyes. Don't count on me, I'm not omnipotent. The method for Bonava to regain his humanity must fall on the two of you, Roland said with a smile, glancing at them. You are his closest people in this world, and the only existences that can stir his humanity. Only when the two of you become his most solid anchors will it be possible for him to become a normal angel. Of course, I can provide you with some small help, such as a mask that can amplify emotions. Rosal and Bernadette exchanged glances, both with thoughtful expressions in their eyes. So, we still have to contact the Steam Church. Sigh, I really don't want to deal with that Steam guy, Rosal said, supporting his forehead, but his gaze gradually became firm. Although he was indeed a doting father to his daughter, this never meant that he didn't love his son. So, if it was truly possible for Bonava to regain his humanity, Rosal would really hold his nose and contact the Steam Church. Roland, on the other hand, smiled and took a sip of tea. The reason he suddenly brought up Bonava's existence was, of course, not simply for Rosal to have a happy family reunion, but mainly to make contact with the Steam Church. After all, future technological advancement required the help of the Steam Church, but the god of steam and machinery was truly too cautious. It was difficult for Roland to reach a cooperation with the god of steam and machinery like he did with Lilith, without sufficiently tempting bargaining chips. In this situation, if Roland wanted to talk to the god of steam and machinery, he naturally needed an intermediary. Rosal was undoubtedly the most suitable intermediary. Although he had once fallen out with the god of steam and machinery, it was undeniable that their relationship was not simply one of enemies, instead, it was somewhat complicated and intertwined. I always feel like you're up to something, Rosal suddenly said, looking at Roland thoughtfully. I'm just preparing to use you as a medium to talk to the god of steam and machinery, Roland said, not hiding anything, as he picked up his teacup and took a sip. Rosal's expression immediately became a bit subtle, but he was not surprised. He probably hesitated for a few seconds, then suddenly said, What do you want to find him for? To advance the tech tree, Roland said, putting down his teacup and looking at Rosal. I think I forgot to tell you earlier, I'm preparing to initiate a revolution, to reorganize the order of this world, and by the way, push the tech tree of this world upwards. The current technological level is still too low. But there's no oil in this world. Rosal was not surprised by Roland's desire to cause trouble, but he thought of something and sighed, saying, Back then, I also thought about pushing the tech tree of this world all the way to our era, but unfortunately, there's no oil, so many technologies just can't be developed. Chapter 226 Opinions from Professionals. I know, that's why I plan to focus on the mass production of Beander items. If we can solve this problem, perhaps we can directly use Beander powers to bypass the difficulties caused by the lack of oil, Roland said, not hiding his thoughts. That's a good idea. Although Beander characteristics are conserved, the creation of Beander items doesn't necessarily require Beander characteristics. However, things made this way have a limited lifespan. Rosal pondered, stroking his chin, then suddenly slapped his head and said, Look at my brain, it's become rigid from staying in this era for too long. Why consider lifespan for mass-produced items? So you think this is feasible? Roland asked for a professional opinion. It's somewhat difficult. The creation of Beander items is not something ordinary people can handle, but I can try to make something similar to a machine tool. If a prototype can be successfully created, with the power of the Steam Church, it might truly be widely promoted. Rosal clearly already had an idea. Then I'll leave it to you, Rosal. After all, when it comes to invention and manufacturing, the entire Steam Church probably can't compare to you, Roland said with a smile, emphasizing flattery when he needed someone. All right, who told me I'm working for you? Rosal didn't decline, but he didn't make any guarantees, directly saying, but I can't guarantee success, and some things can be replaced by Beander items, while others might not. This path might not be viable. Whether it's viable or not, we won't know until we try. And why do you think I want to establish a biological laboratory? Roland said with a smile. Hiss, are you planning to go the biological ascension route? What an idea. Rosal instantly guessed Roland's thoughts, first giving him a thumbs up, then saying, actually, back then, I also thought about developing a biological tech tree, but the Omniscient specializes in machinery, and I haven't seen any Beyonders from the Earth Mother Church in Intis, so that matter was dropped. Now that you want to develop this tech tree, I think it's very promising. As a big shot who once single-handedly promoted technological progress, Rosal was by no means an empty-headed person. On the contrary, he had many ideas in these fields and immediately proposed several research directions he thought were promising. Roland listened quietly, and after noting down these suggestions, he suddenly said, time is almost up. Should we say goodbye? So fast? Rosal was stunned for a moment, then looked at Bernadette and said, Bernadette, when we meet next time, Dad hopes you can change out of that outfit. Of course, Dad doesn't mean to interfere with your freedom to dress, it's just that you don't need to be trapped by the past. I know, Dad, Bernadette interrupted Rosal. She looked at Rosal, revealing a brilliant smile, and said, when we meet next time, I'll put on the latest fashionable dress and wear the newest style of jewelry. I've never been an old-fashioned person. That's good. Rosal breathed a sigh of relief and said, goodbye, Bernadette. Goodbye, Father. Bernadette's voice was soft, but not sad. Because she knew that she and her father would definitely meet again. Wait, boss, you haven't answered me whether Bernadette can join. Rosal suddenly thought of something, but before he could finish speaking, his figure suddenly disappeared. Roland, who had done this on purpose, smiled at Bernadette after canceling Time Shadow and said, I'll take you back. Where do you live now? Bernadette immediately reported an address, somewhat constrained. Roland then used his travel ability to send Bernadette back to her temporary residence. Before leaving, he said, your father's intention is for you to work for me. What do you think? Bernadette was silent for a few seconds, then bit her lower lip and said, Your Highness Lucifer, may I know what you mean by revolution? Bernadette was grateful to the benefactor who saved her father, but as someone who had witnessed firsthand how Rosal established the Black Emperor Order, Bernadette truly had a bit of PTSD regarding keywords like revolution and reordering the world. Bernadette was worried this would be another catastrophe, even though from this brief contact, the person in front of her didn't seem like someone who would do such a thing. You can read this book. After you finish it, I will tell you what we want to do, Roland said, not surprised by Bernadette's reaction. He just smiled and handed Bernadette a copy of Das Kapital. Bernadette took the book with some confusion, then nodded and said, okay, I'll finish it as soon as possible. No need to rush, you can take your time. This is not a book that can be understood by just skimming. Roland smiled, then bid farewell to Bernadette and went home to catch up on sleep. After summoning Rosal for such a long time, he was truly tired. By the time Roland woke up, it was already noon the next day. Good afternoon, Sherlock, are you the only one here? Roland came downstairs and found that besides his alter ego, Jack Jones, who was also catching up on sleep, only Klein seemed to be in the house. Good afternoon, Mr. Lucifer. Klein clearly had some understanding of everyone's whereabouts and answered truthfully. Jack has been catching up on sleep for several days after staying up late. Mr. Medici hasn't returned yet. I received his letter, and it seems he'll be busy outside for a few more days. Mr. Azek and Will went out with little Amon. I heard a new dessert shop opened nearby, and Will really likes their ice cream, so. Roland nodded, indicating he understood, then went to the kitchen to quickly make himself lunch. After eating, Roland tidied up the kitchen before coming to Klein and saying, are you interested in meeting someone with me? Roland received a letter from Bernadette after waking up. Catlia had confirmed that Frank was willing to talk to him, and the meeting time and place were up to him. Is it someone related to my destiny? Klein guessed something and asked curiously. You could say that. At least in the original Destiny, you were one of his few friends. Roland nodded and smiled. Jack has already told you about his existence, that Mr. Frank Lee. It's him. Klein was a little surprised, but also not so surprised, so he asked curiously, how did I become friends with him? It's simple. You also know that Frank is a scientist with some peculiar ideas. His ideas are too crazy in the eyes of the world, and while you couldn't fully accept his wild thoughts, you at least weren't too repulsed, Roland said with a smile. Plus, you really hoped to solve City of Silver's food problem, and for that, you sought out Frank, asking him to help research plants that could grow in the dark, and provided a lot of help. In this back and forth, your relationship improved. So that's how it was. Klein couldn't help but nod after hearing this description. Although he hadn't personally experienced all of this, he could roughly guess what the situation was. Then Klein remembered what Mr. Lucifer had said yesterday and immediately looked up at him, saying, so you plan to use Frank's talent to promote the development of biotechnology. Chapter 227, Future's Biological Disaster. Isn't this great? Roland smiled and said, Frank will be very happy that his ideas are recognized, and he will also be very happy to be able to help others. If things go smoothly, this world might truly be revitalized by his talent. That sounds wonderful, Klein nodded, and for a moment, he too was filled with anticipation for such a future. This anticipation abruptly ceased the moment Klein followed Roland onto the future. The scene before him was simply too fantastical. The future was covered everywhere with fruits that were too large compared to ordinary plants and lush green vines. Klein even saw a cow with a large watermelon on its head run past him, and on the deck not far away, a pile of colorful mushrooms were besieging a fish with legs, while a pirate with sprouts growing from his head was arguing with something that looked like a sunflower. It's spraying milk. The cannon is spraying milk. Just then, Klein suddenly heard someone shouting. He stiffly turned his head and saw that the muzzle, which should have been some kind of extraordinary cannon, was continuously gushing milky white milk. Klein's brain completely crashed, unable to process the scene before him. At that moment, he had only one thought. These things couldn't possibly be Frank's doing, could they? It wasn't just Klein whose brain had stopped working. Bernadette, who had come with Roland, also looked somewhat bewildered at the unfamiliar future before her. For a moment, she even wondered if she was in some kind of illusion. Queen, you've arrived. It wasn't until Catlia's slightly flustered voice sounded that Bernadette fully confirmed this was reality. This made her heart tighten, and then her gaze fell upon Catlia. She thoroughly scrutinized her from head to toe before finally letting out a sigh of relief. Good, nothing extra had grown. What exactly is going on? Bernadette couldn't help but frown and ask. This, Catlia clearly found it difficult to speak. She bit her lower lip, hesitated for a few seconds, and then honestly said, Frank has been very excited since he learned that someone appreciated him, and he wanted to do something to welcome you, Queen. Then we encountered the Undying King, were forced to flee, and could only enter this divine war sea. It turns out that this sea area seems to have residual power from the Earth Mother, which had a miraculous reaction with Frank's experimental creations, and then this happened. After hearing Catlia's explanation, everyone fell silent. Bernadette's expression was momentarily indescribable. She probably composed herself before saying, "Where is Frank? Who called me?" Frank probably heard someone calling him and poked his head out from the other side of the deck. The few of them instinctively looked at him, then fell silent, because Frank at this moment truly did not look like a normal person. He had turned completely green. Frank, are you all right? I remember you weren't this green 3 minutes ago, Catlia frowned and asked with some concern. It's fine, it's fine. This is just a normal detoxification reaction. I already know how to expel these powers from my body, Frank waved his hand and said. Then, as if to prove what he said, Frank's fingertip suddenly swelled up. The bulge quickly expanded to the size of a mushroom, and with the appearance of the mushroom, the green color on Frank's body faded. A dagger then appeared in Frank's hand. He mercilessly cut off the mushroom from its base and then sealed it in a glass bottle. That's right, sealed, because this mushroom was alive. It even thumped and bounced inside the glass bottle. All right, Captain, I'm done. Next, I'll go and deal with everyone else. Frank revealed a hearty smile and said. Facing this scene, Catlia, Klein, Bernadette. After a few seconds of silence from everyone, Catlia nodded with difficulty and said, Good, you go and deal with everyone. Frank then happily left. After he left, Klein suddenly turned to look at Roland, looking as if he wanted to speak but hesitated. It wasn't that Klein couldn't accept slightly crazier ideas, it was just that everything on the future was somewhat beyond his expectations, causing Klein to inevitably feel some concern. Was it really reliable to entrust the future of humanity to Frank? The other two had similar thoughts. In contrast, Roland was much calmer. After the initial surprise, he showed a faint smile and said, "Don't worry, the worst outcome is just a World Mushroom Day. It's fine." Klein: "How could it be fine? And what in the world is World Mushroom Day?" This is not the time for puns and cold jokes. Klein felt that he finally understood where Jack's habit of making puns and cold jokes came from. This was probably something ingrained in their DNA from their lineage. Speaking of which, do great existences also make puns? Klein's thoughts had momentarily wandered off. Cough, Katlia coughed at this moment. Although she was also a bit worried about the future of the world, as the captain of the future, Katlia felt it was necessary to vouch for her crew, at least not to appear too unreliable in front of the Queen. So Katlia said, "This was just an accident. Normally Frank isn't this exaggerated, really, haha." By the end, Katlia herself sounded a bit uncertain, letting out 2 dry laughs. So normally he's just not this exaggerated. Bernadette clearly caught the key point of the sentence. Katlia immediately fell silent, stammering for a long time before cautiously glancing at Bernadette, then at Roland, and finally back at Bernadette, saying, "Queen, I thought you knew." Bernadette: "No, she did not know. I do have some understanding of this," Roland said with a smile at this moment. Klein, however, didn't know whether he should feel relieved or not. "Never mind, let's solve the future's problem first. We can discuss other matters later." Bernadette wanted to say something, but in the end, she didn't continue the previous topic, only saying, "All right." Katlia immediately nodded. "Then shall I go resolve the future's problem?" Bernadette then turned her head to seek Roland's opinion. "Go ahead, I can help too." Roland nodded with a smile. Klein naturally also prepared to help. With the addition of the 3 of them, the future's problem was quickly resolved, and the group of 3, along with Katlia and Frank, gathered together again. "So you are the one who appreciates me so much and wants to invite me to join the laboratory?" Frank spoke excitedly, his gaze towards Roland practically glowing. That's me." Roland nodded, smiling as he looked at Frank, and said, "You can first listen to the purpose of the laboratory I'm establishing, and then decide whether or not to join." Chapter 228 You are a miracle. The reason I want to establish a biological laboratory is to explore the mysteries of the human body. Roland did not hide anything from Frank, smiling as he spoke about his desire to discover a technological path that would allow all humanity to evolve. At the end, he seemed to remember something and added, "Of course, in addition to that, the biological laboratory will also focus on research in the areas of food and herbs. I hope that one day, humanity will no longer be troubled by hunger or illness." This is a very good thing, truly very good. Frank was clearly captivated by the future Roland described, his eyes shining as if glowing. He muttered for a while before seeming to remember something, looking at Roland with a rare expression of hesitation. Frank hesitated for a moment and asked, "Are you really determined to invite me to join your laboratory?" I don't know if I can do well." Before today, Frank had never doubted his abilities. Although he knew that most people did not approve of him, he had never wavered. But today, facing the future Roland described, Frank was uncharacteristically hesitant. He didn't know if his abilities could help Roland, or if he could contribute to the world Roland envisioned. He was afraid that his ideas might lead to bad outcomes. Don't underestimate yourself, Frank, you are a true genius. Your talent is precisely what this world needs for its development. Roland naturally saw what Frank was worried about, and immediately interrupted his wild thoughts, saying firmly, "A genius on the left, a lunatic on the right. Your madness might seem like a bad thing to others, but to me, it is precisely this kind of madness that can carve out a different path for humanity in this cruel and mad world. From this perspective, this is not madness but talent, a gift, hope." Roland smiled as he said this. He looked at Frank, paused, and then said seriously, "Frank, you are the unique miracle bestowed upon this world by the Mother Goddess." Frank seemed to have completely not expected Roland to evaluate him this way, or rather, before today, Frank had never thought that he would be called a miracle. Before today, the most common evaluations Frank heard about himself were, "that freak," and "that mad Frank Lee." People feared him, rejected him, and even more, could not understand him. Frank could understand why they were like that, but he still inevitably felt lost. It wasn't until today, until now, that Frank realized that not everyone misunderstood him, and that there were people in this world who would see him as a miracle. Frank was even too emotional to form complete sentences at this moment. He could only reach out and grab Roland's sleeve, and after organizing his thoughts several times, he finally managed to say a complete sentence. "Please let me join your laboratory. I cannot guarantee that I can achieve your long-cherished wish, but I will definitely do my best to achieve it." If an old saying were used to describe Frank's mood at this moment, it would undoubtedly be, "A scholar dies for his confidant." Katlia's mood was also complicated watching this scene. She was also one of those who didn't understand Frank's various actions, but chose to be tolerant. And at this moment, Katlia suddenly had some realization. Frank's ideas might indeed be mad, but his original intention might just be to make this world a better place. While realizing this, Katlia was also a little happy for Frank. Finally, there was someone in this world who recognized his abilities, and presumably, Frank would no longer be so lonely in the future. Klein's mood was equally complex. On one hand, he felt a little ashamed for having worried about Frank destroying the world earlier. On the other hand, Klein was also happy for Frank and for Mr. Lucifer. Indeed, just as Mr. Lucifer had said before, Frank joining the biological laboratory would be a very good thing. Bernadette, as someone not too familiar with either Roland or Frank, was the calmest at this moment. The various things she had just seen on the future ship flashed through her mind, and a hint of worry emerged in her heart. Is it really okay? But no matter what everyone thought, in this situation of mutual aspiration, Frank joining Roland's biological laboratory became a foregone conclusion. "Frank, welcome." Roland smiled at Frank, then flipped his hand, and a box appeared in it, along with a roll of parchment. "As the owner of the laboratory, this is a small welcome gift from me." Frank was stunned. He took the box and the parchment. After opening the parchment, he found that it was actually the Planter Pathway Sequence 5 inches Druid potion formula. Frank then realized something and opened the box. Sure enough, inside was a Beander characteristic belonging to a druid. "This is too valuable, I can't accept it." Frank's first reaction was to return the items. Roland just stopped his action and said with a smile, "If you think it's too valuable and not suitable as a gift, you can also consider it as the first payment I'm giving you for working for me. So take it, Frank. Don't forget that the higher your sequence, the more beneficial it will be for subsequent experiments. I'm very much looking forward to what surprises you, as a druid, can bring me." If you ask where this druid characteristic in Roland's hand came from, it was, of course, from the tribute of the City of Silver, and the druid potion formula was also included. Colin Iliad had always been very grateful for what Roland had done for the City of Silver and wanted to offer tribute to express his gratitude. To ease his mind, Roland asked for some items that might be useful in the future, including this druid characteristic and the corresponding potion formula. Frank stopped refusing after hearing Roland's words. He carefully put away the items, then looked at Roland and asked, "Your Highness Lucifer, when should I depart for your laboratory?" "No need to rush. I won't hide it from you, the laboratory has just been established, and many areas are not yet perfect. Once these issues are resolved, I will come to pick you up for the laboratory," Roland said with a smile, while calculating where this biological laboratory should be built. Firstly, a bustling urban area is definitely out of the question. Considering Frank's destructive power, and to prevent future accidents in the laboratory like what happened on the future today, the biological laboratory should preferably be built in a desolate place. Secondly, considering that the experimental content of the biological laboratory covers many aspects, such as needing a lot of land to grow various crops or raise experimental animals in the future, the location of the laboratory must have enough land available for use. Finally, it must not be investigated by the authorities. Chapter 229 Zhao Hong almost died of sudden death. After Roland pondered for a few seconds, he suddenly thought of something and muttered in his heart, "Speaking of which, Medici must have already started his scam against the Ruin royal family. If we can successfully get a colonial island from the ruined royal family, it would be a very suitable experimental site. As everyone knows, Roland is a lazy person who prefers to be a hands-off boss. So, after he threw the task of scamming the ruined royal family to Medici, he put the matter out of his mind, only occasionally checking on the progress and ignoring everything else. It wasn't until he needed a place to establish a biological laboratory that Roland remembered the matter of scamming the ruined royal family. Is there anything I can help with? Frank naturally didn't know that the so-called biological laboratory didn't even have a shadow at the moment. He asked enthusiastically, clearly full of vigor. You can consider the experimental environment and equipment you need. Make a list of them for me, Roland said with a smile, looking at Frank. If you know anyone you think is suitable to join the laboratory, you can also recommend them to me. Of course, if there aren't any suitable candidates now, you can also help keep an eye out. Okay, I'll make a list later, Frank nodded, then showed a thoughtful expression and said with some difficulty, I don't think anyone I know is particularly suitable for joining the laboratory, but I'll help keep an eye out for suitable candidates later. It's fine if there aren't any, Roland said with a smile, then remembered something else and added, oh, Frank, do you mind showing us some of your past works? Frank quickly nodded and said, of course not. Undoubtedly, Frank is a very imaginative and creative individual. The things he invents are one stranger than the next. However, because of the recent biological disaster on the future, Frank's remaining unmutated creations seemed quite normal in comparison. It must be said that many people breathed a sigh of relief with this comparison. After this tour, Frank's relationship with Roland and Klein became much closer, especially the latter, who, due to shame, actively chatted a lot with Frank and received an enthusiastic response from Frank. After the tour, Roland and the others didn't stay long. After exchanging contact information, they bid farewell to Katlia and Frank and returned to Backland. Oh, you're back. Where did you go just now? I woke up and there was no one in the room, and I thought I had become an empty nest. Old Jack Jones, sitting on the living room sofa, greeted them with a smile, asking knowingly. Klein glanced at Lucifer, and seeing that the latter didn't object, he sat on the sofa opposite Jack Jones, and began to tell him about what they had seen. Roland, disguised as Lucifer, looked at Bernadette and said, shall I take you back? No need, Your Highness Lucifer, I can go back by myself. Bernadette shook her head. Then she bit her lower lip, seemingly hesitating about something, and after a few seconds, she said, I've finished reading that book. For a master of divination, finishing Das Kapital in one night is simple. Did you understand it? Roland was not surprised, he just looked at her quietly and asked. To be honest, no, Bernadette shook her head and said, I can only say I understood a part of it, but there are still many places I don't quite understand. At this point, Bernadette looked at Roland with a hesitant yet expectant gaze. Clearly, Bernadette hoped to get some answers from Roland regarding the parts she didn't understand. I'm sorry, I'm not a qualified teacher, at least not suitable for interpreting this book for you, Roland shook his head. Roland would have no problem teaching other things, but he wasn't really proficient in Das Kapital. Bernadette was immediately a little disappointed. However, Roland changed the subject and said, I can personally take you to see what we are doing. Perhaps this will help you understand those contents. Bernadette was stunned for a moment, then realized what Roland was referring to, and nodded hesitantly, saying, then I'll trouble you, Your Highness Lucifer. Roland smiled at her words and said nothing more. The reason he wanted to take Bernadette to see what they were doing was partly for convenience. Roland was already planning to see what Little Red was doing, and taking Bernadette along was no big deal. The other reason was simply to deepen Bernadette's identification with the revolution. If he could develop her into a staunch proletarian fighter, that would be even better. Roland didn't really care about a Sequence 3, but who would mind an extra helper? Especially since Bernadette represents more than just herself. If Bernadette firmly commits herself to the cause of the revolution, Rosal, even if he has any ideas about the revolution in the future, will most likely have to just accept it. Roland would not believe the morality of a scoundrel. While Rosal would certainly try his best to help him during his employment, a worker working for his boss and a father fulfilling his daughter's wish are two different concepts. The former might slack off, while the latter, given Rosal's doting father personality, would exert 200% of his ability. This is called fully utilizing the subjective initiative of employees. As for whether Rosal would have an opinion of Roland after knowing about this, Roland didn't care. Given the former's personality, he would at most grumble a bit. Rosal couldn't and wouldn't do anything more. Thus, Roland led Bernadette, following Medici's aura, to the Blood Clan's stronghold in Backland. In front of the desk, Medici, who was flipping through a document with an impatient expression, suddenly became vigilant. Then, probably sensing Roland's aura, he relaxed again and said in a sarcastic tone without even lifting his head. I wondered who it was, turns out it's our conscientious boss. What, have you finally remembered that there's a poor little red here who's about to work himself to death? Cough. Roland blinked, coughing uncharacteristically out of guilt. He also knew that he had given Medici a bit too much to do recently. Although most of it was related to the revolution, a quick count showed that Medici was now not only responsible for the development and ideological work of the revolutionary base, but also for coordinating the acquisition of supplies from Intis, formulating plans against the numinous episcopate, scamming the Ruin royal family, handling Blood Clan-related matters. Medici even had to take care of various big and small matters at home, serving as Xiao Amon's mother, and also studying mysticism knowledge with Will and researching Das Kapital. Only the matters concerning City of Silver were thrown to Amon by Roland, otherwise, they would definitely have fallen to Medici as well. Chapter 230, Countdown to the Ruin royal family's misfortune. Hiss. Roland, who had not realized it until he calculated, looked at Medici with admiration. He immediately gave a thumbs up and said, Little Red's mom, you are simply a superhuman. Medici finally raised his head and, as if unable to bear it any longer, threw the pen in his hand at Roland. Shut up, don't let me hear that strange address again. Roland's movements were agile, and he naturally easily dodged the attack. He then said seriously, this is not a strange address, it is proof of everyone's respect for you. Hey, Medici naturally wouldn't believe his nonsense. He sneered, rolled his eyes, and said, speak, what is it this time? Don't tell me you just came to argue with me. It could be said that he understood someone's nature of never showing up unless he needed something. It's like this, I'm preparing to establish a biological laboratory. Roland didn't beat around the bush and quickly explained the matter. After listening, Medici gnashed his teeth and said, is there a possibility that I might actually die suddenly? Even the Red Angel doesn't have 48 hours in a day. Recently, Medici had been so busy with various matters that he felt he was repeatedly dancing on the edge of sudden death. Taking on responsibility for another laboratory, even the Red Angel couldn't handle it. Hearing Medici's words, Roland blinked and said seriously, don't worry, I will hand this matter over to others to be responsible for, it won't add any extra workload for you. The main reason I came to you is to ask about the progress on the Ruin royal family's side, as establishing a laboratory requires a suitable location. Medici raised his eyebrows, understanding what was going on. He said, I have already arranged for Mr. A to contact Augustus on behalf of the Aurora Order, and I have also told them about the secrets of the Demonist sect. Now, the cooperation between Augustus and the Demonist sect has developed cracks. Although neither side has chosen to completely fall out, they can no longer trust each other. Augustus's people have privately contacted Mr. A. They already have an intention to cooperate with us, but they still have doubts about the true creator being sealed. They are worried that the true creator cannot provide them with enough support, and they also have doubts about our purpose, but these doubts will not last too long. Medici paused here, revealing a confident smile, and said, I won't give them too much time to consider. Apparently, Medici would do something to force the Ruin royal family to cooperate with the Aurora Order. Roland was not surprised by this, only saying, is there anything I can help with? You only get this proactive at times like these. Medici glanced at Roland and, without being pretentious, said, I need power from my past self. A true war angel is enough to dispel all of Augustus's doubts. Augustus's hesitation to cooperate with the true creator was, on one hand, due to concerns that the sealed true creator could not provide enough power, and on the other hand, suspicion about the true creator's purpose in seeking their cooperation. And a true red angel is enough to resolve all these doubts. A war king of angels is already considered top-tier combat power in this era where true gods do not appear, and the Red Priest's ritual of becoming a god can perfectly explain Medici's motive for approaching Augustus. Medici could even use the reasoning of, you become the Black Emperor, I become the Red Priest, plus the true creator, our trio alliance will not fear the seven gods, to persuade Augustus to reach a deeper level of cooperation with them. Of course, Medici had originally planned to dispel Augustus's doubts through other means, but Roland actively came to offer help, and he wouldn't be doing himself justice if he didn't seize this opportunity. All right, I have no problem. Roland naturally didn't mind Medici taking advantage of him and nodded. Is the Rouen royal family preparing to do something? Bernadette, who had been listening for a long time and was utterly confused, finally couldn't help but ask. Medici also glanced at Bernadette at this moment, then looked at Roland and said, did you pick up another child? Not exactly. She's just the child of one of my employees, named Bernadette. I'm temporarily helping to look after her. Of course, she might also become your colleague later. Roland smiled and then introduced to Bernadette, Bernadette, this is Medici. You might have heard his name. Medici. Red Angel. As a seer, Bernadette clearly knew a lot about many secrets and immediately reacted, looking at Medici in surprise. Roland then continued, as for Augustus. The matter is very simple. Augustus wants to introduce a new Black Emperor, and for this, he has done many inhumane things. To cover up these matters, they have cooperated with the demonist sect, planning to have a despair which unleash a great fog on New Year's Day 2 months later, using the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people to conceal certain facts. At this point, Roland paused and looked at Bernadette, saying, the disaster you predicted is this. Bernadette's pupils constricted. She could hardly believe what she had heard, not expecting the Rouen royal family to be so deranged. The next second, Bernadette suddenly thought of something and said, wait, the Rouen royal family wants to introduce a new Black Emperor, doesn't that mean? That's right. Once a new Black Emperor is born, your father will completely fall. At that time, even I will find it difficult to save him. Roland nodded, confirming Bernadette's guess. The Black Emperor has very special characteristics. As long as no new Black Emperor is born, the old Black Emperor will not completely die. Even if the order he once established and the traces he left behind are completely erased, there is still a glimmer of possibility for his return. But once a new Black Emperor is born, even if the order created by the old Black Emperor still exists, he will still completely fall, with no possibility of return. Bernadette's breathing became disordered for a moment. She then took a deep breath, calmed herself down, and looked at Roland, asking, Your Highness Lucifer, so what are you planning? We are sowing discord, disrupting the cooperation between the Rouen royal family and the demonist sect, and at the same time, pretending to be collaborators to gain Augustus's trust, so that we can stop Augustus's actions at the critical moment. Roland smiled, fully demonstrating the art of language. Is there anything I can help with? Bernadette breathed a sigh of relief upon hearing this, then immediately asked. It concerned Rosal's life and death, so she couldn't help but care. Not for now, but you can be prepared. Perhaps there will be a need for your help later. Roland shook his head and said with a smile. Okay. Bernadette nodded and said nothing more, but her mood was clearly very complicated. Seeing her in such a confused state, Roland also knew that it was not suitable to let Bernadette get involved in the reform cause today. He shook his head, then looked at Medici and asked, when do you plan to act? For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.